Faites l'appel, s'il vous plaît, Madame le greffier.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélier. Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Brelade.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de la Trinité. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Présent.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Grouville.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Ouen.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Southern. Madame le député Labbé.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Tadier.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Luce.
Présent.
Madame le député Dublé.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Morel.
Présent.
Madame le député Lehegara.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Ayer. Monsieur le député Ward.
Présent.
Madame le député Alves.
Présente.
Madame le député Gardner. Monsieur le député Gorse.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Farmer.
Présent.
Madame le député Moore. Monsieur le député Mezek.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Osborne. Monsieur le député Balash.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Coles.
Présent.
Madame le député Poré. Monsieur le député Ward.
Présent.
Madame le député Miles.
Présente.
Madame le député Scott.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Renouf.
Présent.
Madame le député Curtis. Madame le député Feltham.
Présente.
Madame le député Binet.
Présente.
Madame le député Jeune.
Présente.
Madame le député Miller.
Présente.
Madame le député Howell.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Binet. Monsieur le député Ferry.
Présent.
Madame le député Kovac.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Curtis. Madame le député Ward.
Présente.
Madame le député Wilson.
Présente.
Madame le député Stevenson.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Andrews.
Madame le greffier.
Prions Dieu, notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait les cieux et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi le gouvernement et la puissance de la terre pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton Saint-Nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, et de les conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit que toute leur délibération étant accompagnée de ta bénédiction réussisse au bien et au soulagement du peuple qui te plut de commettre le soin. Quand nous t'en prions au nom et par le mérite de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant « Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite dans la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonnons nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous induis point en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Car toi la reine, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélier.
Défaut.
Monsieur le député Southern.
Défaut.
Madame le député Moore.
Défaut.
Madame le député Poré. Monsieur le député Curtis.
Défaut. Related tax.
So before we start, could I raise the defo on the Constable of St Helier?
content to raise a defo? Defo is raised.
Sir, could I ask the Defo and Deputy Southern to be raised as well?
Members content to raise the defo on Deputy Southern? Deputy is the defo is raised. Deputy Ayer.
Sir, sorry, sir, would it be possible just to inform members before we crack on that due to some very constructive discussions I was able to have after we adjourned yesterday and this morning, including with the chair of the scrutiny panel, that I'm happy to change my position on this amendment and say to the Assembly that I'm happy for this amendment to be accepted. And I thank the chair of the scrutiny panel for engaging with me and agreeing that we'll meet very shortly and talk about what the best way forward on this is. So I just wanted to inform members of my change in position and the reasons why.
Thank you. Deputy Ayer.
Thank you, sir. Due to the heavy nature of the order paper and due to the time limitations that we have put upon us, notwithstanding the acceptance of the amendment by the Minister for Housing, I would like to propose that we extend the sitting till 8 p.m. today and to 8 p.m. tomorrow, with a break between 5:30 and 6 o'clock on both days. I cannot emphasise enough how important it is that P56, the Senator's law, is debated and a conclusion is reached within this sitting to concentrate people's minds. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Is that proposition seconded? Does anyone wish to speak on the proposition that we sit till 8 o'clock tonight and 8 tomorrow, with a break at 5:30 for half an hour on both days? Deputy Kovacs.
Thank you, sir. I understand the importance of finishing all the business in this week and that we have a heavy agenda, but we also have to consider that we have parents in this assembly and that school is off today. And I can't just find out on the day of the sitting that I have to extend care to my children that I already struggled to find for today. So if this is planned, can be planned in the future ahead, so parents can plan accordingly, because it's not something that we can snap our fingers and find care for. And for me, it's a no, because today I really can't. I could probably for tomorrow, but today I really struggle already.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Howell.
Thank you, sir. I think some of us have a parish assembly this evening, and it would be, I understand that we need to carry on, but could we perhaps do it without the break and finish earlier? Thank you, sir.
Deputy Gorst.
So I appreciate the sentiment of Deputy Kovacs. Many members in this Assembly have caring responsibilities of one description or another. I do wonder, sir, if it might be possible within standing orders for those who do have to leave for caring responsibilities to be given a remote link so that they can at least participate whilst they're caring. That would mean we could get through the business as well. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Gardner.
I'm exactly the same position. School are off and I do need to care for the child. I'll be happy to join remotely if it's possible to continue till 8. I understand it's important and maybe we need to consider to continue on Monday next week. I know it would be a different proposition, but if we need to consider, we need to be back at the Assembly.
Deputy Gardner. Sorry, Deputy Scott.
Just going through the options, sir. Also, whether the PPC has given consideration to perhaps asking some of the proposers of other work for that to be postponed to the next sitting.
Deputy Renouf.
Yes, sir. I do have some caring issues tonight, but I do want to slightly object to the idea that simply by giving a link, members can participate. That is not participation in a debate when you have caring responsibilities at the same time. So I don't really accept that. My preference, for what it's worth, I will abide by what the Assembly decides, but I would prefer we grasp the nettle and said we are overrunning and gave people the chance to organise their time accordingly and reschedule for Monday. I know that will mean rescheduling a lot of business, not least some scrutiny business, which I'm involved in, but I think that gives the chance for people to prepare, to make appropriate arrangements. It will be awkward and difficult, but in my view, it is better than these rushed arrangements that would we give up a night when many people are going to struggle to do it, and a second night when many people will also have other arrangements.
Deputy Doublé.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I appreciate the chair of PPC making this suggestion in the morning rather than at the end of the day. I think that's helpful. But I have two suggestions. The points raised by Deputies Kovac and Gardiner apply to me also. I've already struggled to find childcare today. And I think that if we could possibly consider this over the morning, because there may be some members of the Assembly with caring responsibilities that could make arrangements given some notice. Could we perhaps defer the vote on this until just before lunch, so that those who maybe want to try and make arrangements can do so? And also another suggestion that might help, sir, because some members may be able to participate fully from home, especially if they have if there is a second parent who is able to help at home. Some members may not be able to do that and may need to use the parental responsibilities reason for being excused. In that case, would it be possible for you to have a roll call at the end of the day, so that those members who do need to use that could be in effect from perhaps a second roll call?
Thank you, Deputy. Conor Tarbison-Brillard.
So thank you in pointing out to those who've mentioned sitting on Monday. I wouldn't support that, given that we have a scheduled Constables Committee meeting on that day. But I would like to add, so perhaps PPC might like to consider the items that follow on from the senatorial debate as to whether they could be deferred to another meeting. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Hegarau.
Sir, just to let members know that the PPC chair has already spoken to myself and the Chief Minister. I cannot push mine back any further, and his can't be pushed back any further either, due to the timescales. And more importantly, next week, some of us are on official businesses out of Ireland in France, which means that would not be possible for us to be here, because those arrangements are already made with our counterparts in Europe.
Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. So I don't have caring arrangements apart from my dog, but I've got someone to look after him. But I would like to be an advocate for those who do have caring arrangements. If we're going to be a genuinely inclusive assembly and get people from all walks of life, those who have children, those who have caring responsibilities, we need to take account of that. I would say two things, therefore, that to say at the beginning of today until 8 o'clock, I cannot support that, because that is very short notice to get any sort of caring backing. Second, as well, I would also warn against long days of sittings. By the end of yesterday, I think we were all very fatigued. People were losing track of where we were. We have to give it a full focus and concentration throughout the time that we're here, so that we do not make poor decisions, and we have big decisions to make. And so therefore I don't think going on for 11 hours or whatever it is a sensible thing to do. If we do have to go in on Friday because there are specific things that are perhaps a little easier, then we can discuss that. But I cannot support extending the day today until 8 o'clock for those who have responsibilities. And I don't think it is suitable just to say, I'll go home and attend online. I think the Assembly is here in person. I support people being able to attend online when they have responsibilities, or they may be feeling ill, not spreading illness across the Assembly in such a small place. But this is not the time to do it. So I'm not going to support this. We can come back on Monday. We're here primarily to be members of this Assembly. Meetings can be moved if we have meetings. I have meetings on Monday, I will move them. I have meetings tomorrow, I will move them, because this is the primacy of where we are. I understand if people are off island, but that's a risk you take if you do book something off island on those days. And if you're on state's business, then you're allowed to be off on state's business. So I'm sorry, sir. I think we should be not extending today for those reasons. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Luce.
Thank you, sir. The first thing I'd like to do is to say that I have P53 on the agenda, which I'm happy to move to the next sitting, if that helps. The second thing I'd like to say is, I think everybody in the Assembly must have known we were in for a huge week this week. Just looking at the agenda was quite clear. We have in our diaries Tuesdays and Wednesday, Thursdays and Fridays are continuation days, which Monday is not a continuation day. We should be expecting to be here on a Friday when we have long state sittings. I agree with PPC, we need to go later, we need to get this agenda finished, but the only thing I would say in closing is surely we'll look at shorter lunch hours before we extend the day.
Deputy Howell, I think you've spoken already, haven't you?
Yes, I was just going to say,
Well, you
can
can't
we have a
speak again.
shorter lunch break?
You really can't speak, okay. Deputy Balash. Deputy Balash.
I just wanted to say, so far as it is material to this question, that for a number of reasons I propose to withdraw my amendment to the Section 75 extension,
Right.
and I will be writing to the greffier in that connection shortly.
Thank you. Deputy Miller.
Sir, I think I was going to say, well, partly what echo Deputy Lewis's words. I don't think MD should really be surprised that we're faced with working a bit longer. It was a very, very heavy agenda. It was very apparent with the amendments and the subject matter. This was going to be a very long debate, and I'm surprised, that MD's surprised that they're being asked to work late. I would also like to make the observation that when I had a proper job, I regularly worked till 8 o'clock at night. We're asked to be in this assembly for 2 or 3 days every 3 weeks. I do find it surprising that people can't arrange childcare and caring responsibilities for that time. There are there are people in the public and the private sector who will be working from 9 till 8, and the notion that we can't work beyond 5:30 will basically looks absurd, that people regularly work overtime in their jobs and that we can't because, for various reasons, I'm sure we should all be able to structure our days that we can stay late. Everybody else does it. And I think us not being able to sit late sends a very poor message to the public. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Tom Binney.
Sir, like Deputy Miller, I've had other jobs. I've never had a job that provided me with an hour and a half lunch break, and I'd like to suggest that we'd easily gain another hour if we just took 30 minutes to have a sandwich or a cup of coffee, and perhaps stay on till 6 if members can do that. We almost put in the same amount of time over the 2 days. With the 2 withdrawals, I should imagine we'd get through the same work, and if people were careful about shortening their speeches and only saying what's required, I think we could be home early tomorrow, sir.
Deputy Tadeo.
So I'm disappointed that Deputy Miller doesn't think that being a member of this Assembly is a proper job. Perhaps when she becomes Senator, she'll think that is a proper role and a proper job, but maybe until then, none of us is doing a proper job. I think the key thing here with employment law is that an employer in the public or private sector would never have something foisted upon her or him saying, we expect you to stay till 8 o'clock tonight, we expect all of you to stay till 8 o'clock tonight, without giving them proper opportunity to arrange childcare, sir. I think normally good practice would be that you would at least give some notice that you're required to sit late. And I think this does give food for thought to our Privileges and Procedures Committee about what we should do. So I think, certainly for my part, I would be happy to sit till 8, and I would probably avail myself of an online link after 5:30 so I can go home and do some family responsibilities of my own while still listening and still fully participating, because ultimately we can still speak and we can still vote online, and those are the most important things. Obviously being here is great, but it's not essential, as Deputy Doublé is showing us now. She's participating from home and contributed to this part of the debate. It is entirely possible to balance those things, and we did it quite well over COVID. But I think making these decisions on the hoof is not good practice, and it is not good family-friendly policy. So I think at the very least, we all know that we should be coming back tomorrow. I've certainly cancelled other engagements that I would have had on the Friday. I'm not expecting to sit on the Monday, but Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are all continuation days where we should be available. So I would suggest that we work till normal hours this evening, which I think, a half an hour extension we accept as being entirely reasonable to finish off the part of the debates that we're working on so things don't hang over. I think if we had noticed that we were sitting until 8 o'clock tomorrow evening, that would give us all time to make reasonable preparations and then sit Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday if necessary. We do only meet every 3 weeks in this Assembly. It used to be every 2 weeks. And I've never supported that reduction in our sitting times. And I would also ask my committee, via the chair, that we do put that on the agenda, because we do find ourselves in these pinch points at key times during the year where Assembly business just masses up, and meeting every 2 weeks would give us more flexibility, sir. So where we are, my position is very clear. Let's meet tonight up until 6 o'clock if we need to, but tomorrow until 8 o'clock, and then come back Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, as we are supposed to be doing, as we are expecting to do. Those are the continuation days.
Deputy Morell will be the last speaker, and then I'll ask Deputy Iyer to reply. Deputy Morell.
So it's more just to say, I'd be grateful if we could all stop the comparisons to this Assembly and employers, given the events of Tuesday morning, because it's clear that we're not friendly in many ways whatsoever. And so this idea that we can compare ourselves to employers is just not appropriate whatsoever, and I prefer us to give up that pretense. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Iyer.
Thank you, sir. Whilst host of opinions, which is unsurprising, I was asked if there were any items on the order paper that could be moved forward, and whether I'd engaged, and that is indeed the case. I've engaged, as was mentioned by the Environment Minister, and he's very kindly suggested that he may be able to defer P53. I engaged with the Minister of Justice and Home Affairs as well, and she informs me that she can't delay her proposition. Obviously, the concern about parental duties, obviously we do have the online availability, and that is purely for those very parental duties that we've been discussing. Planning ahead, that is very difficult for me. I do not know how the debate's going to go, and I had no idea that the RTL would be extended for such a long period yesterday. So this is really the first opportunity that I've had to make a suggestion about extending the time. Monday not being a continuation day, and obviously as the chair of the committee has mentioned, it's the committee de connétable on Monday, so there would be a possibility that we wouldn't be core 8 anyway. And deferring until lunchtime, I think Deputy Dublé mentioned that. I think it's important that we get clarification now if we are going to continue later today. And Deputy Tom Binet mentioned the suggestion of a lunch being reduced and staying till 6 p.m, which I think is a perfectly fine suggestion, but what I'm proposing is that we stay till 8. I will maintain that standpoint, and if it fails, then I'm sure that Deputy Binet can make that proposal himself. So I maintain my proposition, sir, and I call for the appel.
The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. The proposition is we sit till 8 o'clock today and tomorrow, with a break at 5:30 for half an hour. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. And the proposition has been adopted. 26 votes pour, 20 votes contra. So returning to the debate in second reading, we were considering the part 6 of the Fourth Amendment lodged by the panel, and the next member listed to speak was Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. Actually, after Minister's acceptance, I wanted to ask, before, probably I'll not speak, I'll ask two things, if it's possible to be provided. I'm not sure if they're by the greffier or by the Minister. One thing is, what are ministerial powers by order are included, to have like a screenshot, because I scrolled through the like for example, Article 23 gives several ministerial powers to amend the law by order, and I think they're pretty extensive. I also understand that the minister can introduce to act law by order and not coming back to the Assembly. So if it's possible to have a consolidated table, what are the powers by order what does it mean by order? That minister didn't make decisions, sign, and it's happening. That minister doesn't need to come back to the Assembly to understand before the third vote. And I'm not sure like everyone felt, but at some point yesterday, I felt that I'm losing track what we accepted and what we amended. So for example, periodic tenancy, what's the final version that we are going to vote in the third reading? I kind of face you might know, but I'm not entirely sure if it's, I would like to see the law, I don't need to see, but I would like to see what we would be voting at the third reading, because there were so many amendments and it was so complex. I'm not sure who can provide, how it can be provided, but I think it will help to the final debate. Thank you.
Deputy Breniff?
So I was going to speak in favour of the amendment, but the Minister has indicated he's accepting it, and so I have no further need to talk.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on this amendment? I call upon Deputy Rob Ward.
So I was just going to say, I think we moving this debate on, I'm pleased that the Minister has had this connection with scrutiny, had that dialogue, and there have been changes as we've gone through this debate. And I think that's a positive move forward and a really challenging thing. And I think, again, there needs to be some credit given across scrutiny and the Minister for that dialogue. I just want to make that point. So I can accept the fact that it's been accepted as well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. I call upon Deputy Jones to reply. Deputy Jones.
Thank you, sir. And just for a reminder, after we had a sleep on it, we're talking about Amendment D1 on removing criminal penalties to secondary legislation. And so the panel brought this amendment because both the panel's expert advisor and industry representatives warned this addition of Article 7 could lead to the criminalisation of otherwise compliant landlords based on vague or subjective standards around giving reasons for notice. And the JLA and Jersey Estate Agents Association further questioned the need for criminal penalties, arguing that disputes over termination grounds are more appropriately resolved through civil courts, as in the case in the UK. So after considering all the evidence, the panel believes there is still a need for proportionate enforceable penalties framework. And as the Minister has mentioned, we will be working with him on what that would look like. But we believe this cannot be achieved through the current drafting, and we're not confident that a new criminal offence of this nature is ready for implementation without further definition and supporting mechanisms. And as the Attorney-General said yesterday and confirmed yesterday, that criminal penalties can be contained in both primary and secondary legislation. And this is what we're asking members to support with this amendment, that this specific criminal penalty regarding giving false or misleading reasons to end a tenancy is moved to secondary legislation so that any expanding of the penalties regime can be done following proper consultation, and for this Assembly to then approve a penalty framework that's proportionate, effective and targeted and well understood. And I'd just like to thank the Minister for his constructive discussions with scrutiny, and I hope that members can support this amendment. Call for the appel.
Is the appel called for?
Yes, sir.
The appel is called for. Members are invited to return to their seat. And I invite the greffier to open the voting. Before members have the chance of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the amendment has been adopted unanimously, 46 votes for. We now move on to the third amendment lodged by Deputy Renouf, and I invite the greffier to read the amendment.
Part 1, Article 6. 1. In Article 6, new Part 3A, new Articles 7A3 and 5, delete capped at 5%. 2. In Article 6, new Part 3A, new Article 7A 5A, delete but capped at a maximum of 5%. 2. Article 19. In Article 19, 1, delete new Article 24 1B. 2. Renumber the remaining new subparagraphs and cross-reference those accordingly.
Deputy Renouf.
So when I wrote the report to accompany this amendment, I said it was a short amendment with a suitably short report. I confess the shortness of the report may have been partly motivated by the fact the deadline fell when I was on holiday, but happily I can say that this will be an even more suitably short speech. My argument in essence is that a 5% cap on annual rent increases goes too far and in a high inflation environment would shift too much risk onto landlords. An inflation cap with exemptions is sufficient to protect tenants from draconian rent increases whilst allowing landlords to respond fairly to an inflationary environment. The Minister has accepted the amendment, for which I am grateful. I don't like to take the Assembly for granted, but I cautiously note that there seems to have been general acceptance that the amendment makes the Minister's proposals more acceptable. So if I've got that wrong, then I'll say more in summing up, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Chair.
Thank you, sir. The panel and expert advisor found limiting rent increases to once per year with 2 months' notice and in many instances limited to RPI was uncontroversial and were aligning with best practice. During a public hearing, the Jersey Estate Agents Association confirmed that annual reviews set at RPI with 2 months' notice have been standard practice under the 2011 law, and that enshrining them in the amendment law would merely formalise an existing convention. However, concerns were raised about the proposed cap of 5% or RPI, whichever was lower. Key concerns included the strength of the evidence base supporting the policy, potential negative impacts on the rental market and rental supply, and risk of unintended consequences. After much discussion, the panel felt that the decision to change the percentage figure cap or remove it to be one for the Assembly. We therefore focused on developing Amendment A1, which also makes an amendment in this regard, but proposed to place a permanent floor under the percentage figure so that no further Assembly could reduce it below 5%. The intention was to provide certainty, but Deputy Renouf's third amendment offers a cleaner approach. By pegging increases solely to RPI, it removes the need for any additional percentage safeguard. It simplifies the law, making it more transparent and easier to enforce, and this approach is supported by the panel's report, which found that the mechanism for the rent increase limit was developed with the Government of Jersey's Economics Unit. That work, set out in the rent stabilisation paper, drew on existing analysis, historic RPI data and established rental practices. It shows that RPI alone is a credible and robust anchor for rent stabilisation, and for these reasons I urge members to back the third amendment.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on the third amendment? Deputy Andrews.
Yes, thank you, sir. No, it's been a very interesting amendment that Deputy Renouf has lodged, and I know there's been quite a lot of support among landlords and other members of the public as well. But I just wanted to really understand that the rationale behind the amendment, because as it currently stands, of course, you've removed the cap, but also say with a landlord, you know, the investment return is going to be within the rate of inflation. I know if I was looking at any investment opportunities, I'd be looking to derive a positive real return, if possible, above the rate of inflation. I think that would probably be encouraging investment in any investment opportunities that are available, whereas if you're only restricting an investment return within the rate of inflation, then potentially you're constraining investment. So I just wanted to understand why the Deputy only addressed the cap. I thought if anybody was of the strong belief that investment returns should not be restricted, why was the RPI measure still left within the amendment? And that's all I've got to say, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on this amendment? Deputy Tadia.
So it's just a follow on from the suggestion put forward by Deputy Andrews. I mean, there has been, of course, a strong theme in this that property, landlords who invest in property do it as an investment and therefore they expect to get certain returns. But of course, we've also had the counter-argument that we're talking about homes here, not properties. And the other point that I've made earlier is that not all landlords are homogenous. So there are different landlords who become landlords in different ways, sometimes accidentally, sometimes by choice, sometimes it's a calculated business proposition, which they can do on a larger scale. Other times it's on a small scale, as we've heard, something to put away as a private pension, perhaps in the absence of any other pension pot, or to add to a pension pot. So this idea of inflation as being the benchmark would be fine if indeed all landlords were buy-to-let landlords and they were still paying off a mortgage. But we know that in Jersey, especially given the fact that Jersey has had no inheritance taxes for since going back in all of our feudal times. We've never had inheritance taxes, and I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. The consequence is, unlike other countries, that property then concentrates in families' hands over generations, where the redistribution doesn't take place as it might in other places. So there will be lots of landlords out there who we can correctly attribute as being to the rentier class, where they don't need to work in the classical sense. You could say they've never done a proper day's work in their life, perhaps, to paraphrase Deputy Miller, because they simply rely on rental income. I don't think they're in the majority, and I suspect that's not what the Jersey Landlords Association is about representing. But they do exist. They in some cases, own hundreds of properties that they've never, ever paid for themselves, apart from perhaps to maintain, and they get all the benefits from it. That's how feudalism works. It's a great idea. And of course, RPI is pretty much meaningless to them in the sense that they don't have any mortgages to service. Their properties might have been paid for hundreds of years ago and repaid by generations of tenants who they can get their income from. So I think we do need to look at this RPI, and it's very difficult to have a one-size-fits-all, because unless we're going to have a much more sophisticated residential tenancy law which actually looks into what a fair increase in your rent would be, and I think that's actually what a sophisticated and mature rent tribunal could do. They could look at the circumstances and say, look, okay, your landlord has an interest-only buy-to-let, and of course your landlord is going to be much more impacted by a 10% RPI figure than a landlord who has perhaps 100 properties or homes in their portfolio. They may not all be homes, of course, some of them could be unoccupied, at which point they'd simply be properties. And they're less affected by the RPI because they can take a longer view over time. So it is not a simple picture as simply saying because RPI is at such a level, we need to make sure that landlords can charge at least what RPI is. It is much more sophisticated, and I think that's why it's difficult, I suspect, both for the Minister and for anyone else trying to bring what might be a semblance of fairness into this whole argument, especially when we're dealing with private contracts and private property rights, to simply say that RPI is a sound figure. So that doesn't necessarily help with the debate in any way about how one should vote, but I think it's not simply as saying that RPI is always going to be the right figure. And of course, we also know that just because RPI is running at whatever percentage, we've already heard that a lot of landlords do not put it up to that point in the first place. So we do need to be careful about, as Deputy Miller has said, that the figure is seen as a floor rather than a ceiling. And I would maybe suggest that in future, if there were possibilities, that we could have a much more sophisticated way of deciding what a fair rent increase is, both depending on what tenants can afford, as well as what the landlord needs to recoup to have their profitability.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Miller.
Sorry, sir. So I would just like to reiterate my concerns about the whole question of trying to limit what landlords can do with rent. I do support Deputy Renniff's amendment, but I don't really think it goes far enough. Many people who are landlords have spoken to me and said that they don't apply rent increases. They can go for years without applying rent increases because they like their tenant, everything's fine, and they're very happy with the arrangement. On the other hand, you will sometimes hear stories of people whose rent has gone up by 20%. They'll say, my rent's gone up by 20%. But that often masks the fact that the rent hasn't gone up at all for several years, and the landlord is trying to get onto a market, is trying to catch up with the market. I do believe that when you put a restriction, if you say to someone, you cannot charge more than X, you cannot increase something by more than X, people who would not otherwise make increases will increase by that amount. I think by the very creation of a limit, I think rents will go up. There will be landlords who will put rents up as a preemptive measure before the law comes into play. It will lead to an increase in rent before the law comes into effect, and it will lead to routine rent increases among landlords and for tenants who would not otherwise have had them. And I do think we have to bear that in mind. I know not everybody will agree with that assessment, but that is my very genuine fear, and I would be willing to put money now that that is what will happen. I think we do also have to remember, listening to Deputy Taddy, that these are civil contracts, and regardless, we are talking about homes. Yes, we are talking about someone renting a home, but these are civil private contracts, often between individuals, and it doesn't really matter whether someone is using it, whether they're using it as an investment or whether they have inherited the property or how they come to have that property that they are letting out. It is a private arrangement. They are choosing to make that property available for rent. Everybody wants that arrangement to go well. Everybody in a landlord-tenant situation, both parties have clear interests in making that work and making that work fairly, because if a landlord's heavy-handed, the tenant may leave. If the tenant damages the property or disturbs the neighbours, the landlord will want them to leave because they won't want the grief of having to deal with the neighbours. Everybody has an interest in making that arrangement work. And I do think we should be very cautious about establishing bodies who come in and make pronouncements about what and what is not fair on the basis of you need to have a vast amount of information about properties, the type of property. It will cost a fortune because a rent tribunal cannot sit there on the basis of this is a 3-bedroom house, therefore the rent cannot be more than X. There are 3-bedroom houses come in literally all shapes and sizes and locations, and all of those things come into effect. We will be creating a tribunal which will be the most expensive tribunal in the island, because the members will be going out every other day to look at properties and to compare properties and decide what adequate market rents are. It's a very subjective point of view, and I think we could be creating, even though we're told there is no bureaucracy, we could be creating a bureaucracy that just collapses on its knees because of the amount of work involved in trying to set what is a fair rent. So I know not everybody will agree with that, but I have genuine concerns about placing restrictions on landlords, and I do believe it will lead to increases in rent and not maintenance at low levels of rent. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister.
Thank you, sir, and I'm grateful for Deputy Renner for bringing this amendment, and I just want to provide members with two reassurances. The first is that this as an option, as opposed to the option that was originally proposed in the law, was something that was examined very deeply in the policy work as we were building up to proposing a residential tenancy law. So it's not an option out of the blue, just established for convenience sake. It was something that was deeply considered in that process. And I did send members yesterday morning the document that examined all of that and showed the rationale behind it, and demonstrates that this option is one that does rank highly in all of that. So it's not something just out the blue. It's a credible option and one that I do believe represents progress here. So I'm happy to accept it. The second reassurance I want to provide, and hopefully this goes to the points that Deputy Miller was just making, which is to reiterate, and it does need reiterating because of irrelevant comparisons with systems in other jurisdictions that have been raised in the last few days. But what is proposed on the table is a completely passive system. It does not require any extra requirements to be met, or bureaucracies or permissions or anything like that when it comes to landlords managing what kinds of rent reviews they wish to apply. They will have absolute freedom to propose to their tenants the rent review that they regard as being acceptable and appropriate, and that's is something that only if it contravenes that cap of RPI, that the tenant would have the ability, if they sought to use it, to ask an independent rent tribunal to look at. That tribunal will be independent. It will be composed of qualified people who have a deep understanding of the market and will understand all the nuances that there are in terms of different property sizes, locations, etc. And so there are absolutely clearly defined exemptions. One of those, sir, is catching up with rent when you haven't increased it for several years. So, sir, if you are a tenant who has had it good for a few years, not had your rent go up for a few years, and your landlord decides, actually, sorry, now is the time for a bit of a realignment on here, they are 100% free to propose it to that tenant unilaterally. And if that tenant's got any sense, they'll say, this is a good deal, because I've had it good for a few years. The landlord's not being unreasonable now in proposing catching up with that. And if I sought to go to a rent tribunal, they're not going to side with me. What a complete waste of time and effort appealing to that tribunal would be. So, sir, that system, 99.9% of the time, or whatever it's going to end up being, will be one that people don't have to engage with. It will purely be there as, hopefully, a little thought in the back of the landlord's head that when they're calculating their rent increases and their rent reviews, to just make sure, yeah, this is necessary, I am justified in doing this, and not, sir, for people pushing their luck or trying to squeeze until the pips squeak, basically. That it will be a deterrent for that. But that's probably as far as it will go in almost all circumstances, sir, and only really exist as a backstop. And that backstop is as passive as you could possibly get it. It's not, it's not a government bureaucrat coming round with a clipboard and saying to a landlord, this is what you can and can't do. It's not anything vaguely like that. It's as passive as you can possibly get it. And that regime, sir, I think is the proportionate system for Jersey. It's far less imposing than the systems that Jersey has had in the past with previous rent tribunals. And, sir, it actually already reflects what is good practice already across, because lots of people already have terms in their contracts that limit rent increases to RPI that currently don't allow them to catch up if they choose not to implement that rent review on an annual basis. So actually this is probably better for them. But hopefully, sir, it will give tenants peace of mind that ordinarily, not extraordinarily, but ordinarily, that if they get surprised with a massive rent increase that they just can't seem to find any legitimate justification for, that they'll have an independent place to go to double check that for them. That will provide peace of mind and hopefully make it easier for tenants to, when they're living in the private rental sector, to know that they've got a degree of predictability there. And if they are to have a rent increase imposed on them that's higher than RPI, it's going to be for a good reason, because the system allows and enables for that, sir. So I think this system is really something members don't have to worry about, and we did look very, very carefully at it. I sent the document to members yesterday. It's a comprehensive piece, and I don't share the concern of Deputy Miller that it's going to establish high rent increases as a benchmark, because the element she was concerned about is well taken care of in the rules that are being proposed. So I'm happy to support the amendment from Deputy Renouf, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Scott.
Hi, sir. I'm just going to also follow up on what the Minister said. You have passive and active tenants in the case of this rent tribunal, because you will have some tenants who, despite the fact they exist, despite the fact they have rights, won't actually go to the rent tribunal. and won't be protected by it. You could have very active, aggressive tenants who are saying, this rent increase rounded just above RPI isn't RPI, and actually going to the rent tribunal. So I think that the actual benefits of actually creating something and quite how it supports tenants needs to be considered in this conversation too.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Gardner.
I wanted to ask a point of clarification, but I understand it's impossible now if who's assistant minister to the minister might respond. About the passive, so there are contracts that exist now. Most of the contracts maybe not comply 100% with what we would, if it would pass. So for example, if it's rent increase, if it's a tenancy, so we are talking about the passive. When the minister expecting this contract to be amended and comply with existing law, and obviously to change the contracts that exist now will take time, money, and learning the law. So is it expectations that current contracts would be amended? And if yes, when?
Does anyone else wish to speak on this amendment? Rob Ward.
Thanks, sir. Just very briefly, again, we've got an example of a question that was asked about what happens if somebody hasn't put the rent up for some time, and the law says if it is below market value, and that is the case, that is an exemption that can be used. I just urge members to really look. I know it was really difficult yesterday with what was going on, but what is actually the law actually says, because we're going down some rabbit holes here that we don't need to. The law has got those exceptions in there. And this amendment, all it does is link to inflation. If people, it's a simple amendment, and it does not stop those other exceptions if you're way behind market rent, or if you make significant improvements for the benefit of the tenant, then you can also make exceptions to that increase in rent. Those things are in the law as protections because in terms of improving the quality of housing. Just remind members of that, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Balash.
So would the Deputy explain why he has fixed upon RPI as being the appropriate index to apply? The Consumer Prices Index is the internationally recognised measure of inflation, which is used by the United Kingdom and most OECD countries. It tracks the average change in prices of a fixed basket of goods and services typically bought by most households, and it excludes certain costs such as mortgage interest and is therefore a rather more consistent and comparable indicator of inflation in any community. I'd like to ask the Deputy why he has fixed upon RPI.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on this? Deputy Gorst.
Thank you, sir. It's nice to be getting to some amendments that one can support. I suppose I supported some yesterday, but the Minister just didn't. Because this what's proposed here is certainly better, in my view, than what the Minister was initially proposing. As he said, he had his policy officers produce a document looking at various options so that he could bring forward from a policy perspective what he thought was the best policy when it comes to rent control. And he circulated that document produced by policy officers again. I think he'd already circulated it months ago. And his policy officers, as he said, produced that document. And the reason I can support this amendment is because it's been a fascinating debate, and we're not at the end of it yet, sir. We've still got the votes on all of the articles to go. Because the Minister is, on one hand, quite right. We are getting to the situation in some parts of this law where it's representing what good landlords already do. It's representing what best practices and agents are suggesting to landlords. If we understand the rationale of the Minister correctly, he has never, in his own words, been seeking to penalise good landlords. It has always been about, in his words, rogue landlords or landlords that abuse their tenants or whatever terminology you might wish to use. And therefore, I come back to the points I've been making throughout this debate. It can't do what it's described on the tin as doing. Yesterday, we heard from Deputy Balash, right now, people are experiencing bad landlords who are not even giving contracts. And yet the current law says landlords should give contracts. And so we are producing a law which will have economic impacts and unintended economic consequences that we don't know about. That's what the economic advice says, rather than the policy advice. So we're producing this law to correct an evil, even though we can't be sure that that's what it's going to do. And so I will be supporting this particular amendment, but I still have grave concerns that islanders will have finished this debate believing that they won't have what's described as excessive rent increases, and yet both the Minister and his colleague have said there are a number of black and white exceptions in the law which will allow for what some tenants will consider are excessive increases. Because if a landlord hasn't put their rent up for 5 years, but the law allows them to come along and do a rent review and put it up by RPI compounded at the end of that 5 years, no one can persuade me that when that tenant comes to the housing minister and says, why on earth have you put my rent up by, I've had a rent increase by 25%, because that's what RPI has done, compounded. They're still going to be accused of being bad landlords, even though they're going to be complying with this new legislation. And a landlord puts a new heating system, for example, into a tenanted property. Who is that for the benefit for? Who is going to adjudicate about the benefit of that heating system? Is it adding value to the investment, or is it improving the living conditions of the tenant? That will be the rent tribunal to decide. It's adding a whole host of uncertainty for good landlords who are already doing the basics, and this category of bad landlords that we keep hearing about will do, as I opined yesterday and as Deputy Miller opined today, they will use RPI as their base for increasing their rents every year. And so I think I'll be supporting the amendment because it's an improvement on the rent capping that was initially recommended by the Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on this amendment? I call upon Deputy Renouf to reply. Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. I thank all members who've spoken. I'm encouraged by the fact that despite all the points that were raised, I don't think I detected a single voice speaking actually against the amendment. But there were some other points raised and I should address them. I think the Minister and a few other speakers have responded to some of them, but I do want to tackle this idea that the landlords will, even though the 5% cap has been removed, will still be in a position where landlords are able to and will choose to relentlessly increase rents by inflation every year just because they fear otherwise falling behind. And I think there's a bit of a contradiction in this argument, because the people who make that argument also usually make the point that many landlords have great respect for their tenants, want to keep good tenants, and don't want to chase them away. They have a good stake in good tenants. So it seems to me perverse that they would change their behaviours, knowing that in the law that that there are at least two situations which allow them to raise rents to catch up, first of all, as we've already heard. That is a specific reason allowed. And, of course, when a new tenancy starts, they can also rebase their rent at that time. I would say those who are minded to put up rents by inflation every year in response to this law are probably overlap significantly with those who would also push their luck with above inflation rises in the current environment. And I do think also, with respect, it is scaremongering to suggest that the rent tribunal will be overwhelmed by cases coming to it. Most rents will be set within the inflation cap, as they are now, because RPI is common practice. And there will be even more cases where an above inflation increase will be accepted by the tenant, because the landlord will have explained the reasons, and they are reasonable, and the tenant knows that going to the rent tribunal would be a waste of time. But it is right that if an above inflation rise is proposed, that there should be some reason for it, and the tenant should know what that is. I say all of that, of course, none of it is directly relevant to this amendment. Deputy Andrews asked how I justified not allowing above inflation rises, because it would mean damaging potentially the investment potential of property. I think there's several answers. One of them is that, of course, above inflation rises are allowed, as we've heard explained, under several exemptions. But the other point is that capital gain is a key part of why anybody holds property. And so that also needs to be factored in. And as I say, the other point is that landlords also know that with a new tenant they can reset the rent as well. Deputy Balash asks, why did I fix on RPI? The glib answer to that is that I didn't. The Minister did. But I think the real answer is that RPI is the standard that is used now throughout, as I understand it, throughout most contracts anyway. The difference between the measures is technical. There may be a few occasions when they diverge significantly, but overall, over time, when one rises by a greater amount, another one rises by a smaller amount, and over time, the situations reverse and the measures do not massively diverge over a long period. To Deputy Gardner's point, if it's the rent rise, I think, that will have to meet the terms of the law at the point when the law becomes law. I don't think contracts have to be rewritten at that point unless the contract happens to stipulate above inflation rent rises, in which case I guess the contract would fall foul of the new law. But I think, with respect, I think it's highly unlikely that, that many contracts include that clause. Deputy Scott's point, I think, hinted at vexatious claims, and I think there will be rules to ensure that vexatious claims to the tribunal are not admissible. As far as Deputy Gorst is concerned, with the greatest respect, I'm not going to rise to the bait, because where the most relevant point he made, I think, in terms of the debate on this amendment, was right at the beginning when he said he supports the amendment. The other points I may return to in third reading. So the reason I brought this really was because the landlords I spoke to all said their number one concern with this law was the 5% cap. And therefore, it was a relatively simple change to make, offers clarity, It reflects existing practice. It doesn't do serious damage to the minister's overall intent, and therefore it felt to me an appropriate thing to do, and I'm encouraged by the fact that nobody in the Assembly so far at least seems to have voiced an argument against removing the 5% cap. So I will call for the appel.
Appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that the amendment has been adopted unanimously, 46 votes for. We now move on to the final amendment in second reading, proposed by the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel. I invite the greffier to read the amendment.
Part 7, Article 6, and Article 6, new Part 3A, new Article 7D4, for if this paragraph is applied by order, substitute if this paragraph is applied by regulations. Article 11, in Article 11, new Part 4A, new Article 13B4E, for unless this requirement is excluded by order, substitute unless this requirement is excluded by regulations. Part 10, in Article 18.2, delete new Article 23.2.1a and 1d and renumber the remaining new subparagraphs and cross-references accordingly. Part 11, 2 onwards. Part 2, in Article 19.1, after new Article 24.1.1c, insert 1d, applying Article 7d4 so that certain exceptions to the limit on rent increases are determined by the Rent Tribunal. 1e, excluding the requirement in Article 13b4e for the chair and the deputy chair of the tribunal to have a qualification in law. 3, renumber the subsequent new subparagraphs and cross-references accordingly. 4, after Article 19.1, insert 2. After Article 24.1, there is inserted 1AA. Before lodging a proposition containing draft regulations to be made under paragraph 1(e), the minister must consult the judicial greffier. And 5, renumber the subsequent paragraph of Article 19 accordingly.
Deputy Chair.
Thank you, sir. And the first running order, these amendments A and 3, A3 and A2 were taken separately. Subsequently, they've been put together because we were advised that if one does not pass, the other falls. But I will talk about them separately now. So Amendment A3 is that the Rent Tribunal was designed to be a passive body responding to disputes, not actively regulating the market. Yet the draft amendment proposed by the Minister would allow the Minister to expand the Tribunal's remit via order, which could be used to compel landlords to apply to the Tribunal before implementing rent increases and rent increase exceptions. This risks transforming the Tribunal into a proactive regulator, contrary to its intended function. So our amendment removes this order-making power, meaning that any expansion of the Tribunal's remit should come through regulation, ensuring that proper scrutiny and preventing mission creep. As amended, the Tribunal would remain a passive body, and the process for dispute resolution is clear. When a landlord issues a notice of rent increase, the tenant has 2 months and 2 weeks from the date of notice to apply to the Tribunal if they believe the increase does not comply with the law, or if the increase relies incorrectly on one of the exceptions to the rent increase in limit. This should now be much clearer for tenants to judge after Deputy Renouf's amendment, as increases are now limited to RPI only. If it is then up for the Tribunal to determine whether the increase is lawful and to rule accordingly. Importantly, there is no criminal offence if a landlord is found to have applied an unlawful increase. It simply means that the increase can be ruled invalid, or the Tribunal may set an alternative rent. We therefore welcome that the Minister has accepted this amendment and hope the members will follow suit. Moving to Amendment A2, the Rent Tribunal will play a pivotal role in adjudicating disputes and ensuring compliance. It is therefore essential that its members, particularly the Chair and Deputy Chair, possesses appropriate legal qualifications. As it stands, the law allows the Minister to remove this requirement via ministerial order, and we believe this is inappropriate. Our amendment requires that any change to tribunal member qualifications be made by regulation, subject to Assembly approval and only after consultation with the judicial greffier. This ensures transparency, preserves judicial standards and protects the tribunal's independence. It is a safeguard against the erosion of competence, and it reflects concerns raised by both our expert advisor and the Jersey Landlords Association. And we again welcome the Minister that has accepted this amendment. I hope that members will follow suit on both Amendment 2 and Amendment A2 and A3.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak on the amendment? Minister.
Thank you, sir, and thank you to the scrutiny panel for proposing this amendment. There's always a balance to be struck between going for order-making powers and prioritising perhaps speed in times of necessity, or instead going for regulation-making powers and prioritising accountability and scrutiny in that process. The scrutiny panel, having looked at these proposals, felt that the balance was better if it was swayed towards regulation-making powers, and I'm absolutely fine with that, sir. And if that's a safeguard in there, that gives members greater confidence that any potential changes in the future will go through the democratic processes of this chamber rather than order-making powers, then that's absolutely fine, sir, and I'm very happy to accept that.
Thank you, Minister. Does anyone wish to speak on the amendment? I call upon Deputy Chair to reply. Deputy Chair.
Thank you, and I'll keep it brief. Thank you to the Minister for laying out his acceptance of this, and I call for the appel.
Has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I invite the greffier to open the voting. All members have had the chance to cast their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been adopted unanimously, 43 votes for. We now have completed the amendments and return to the articles as amended in second reading. Does any member speak on the articles as amended in second reading? No member wishes to speak on the articles as adopted. Then is the appel called for?
So can I ask, are all the articles being taken en bloc, or
Yes.
can they be taken separately?
Well, they've been proposed en bloc. They are articles of a law, so you'd be entitled to ask for a particular article to be considered separately, although you'll remember what the proposer said about concerned about the consequences. But they've been proposed en bloc by the proposer, but members will be entitled to ask for articles to be looked at separately. It is a law.
May I do that, sir, then, please? Article 7A, 7B, 7C, 7D, 7E, I think 7F and 7G could be taken together, please.
Is that the whole of Article 7?
Well, thing is, Article 7 is separate from Article 7A. And
well, Article 7 has gone. Do you mean the whole of Article, you mean 7A to 7G inclusive, do you?
That's correct, sir, thank you.
Just the new article.
The new Article 7A to 7G.
Sorry, just confirm, that's the new article, not the old number. We've been here before.
Yes, it has. Minister, do you have any observations on permitting there being a separate vote on Articles 7A to 7G inclusive?
So obviously, any members entitled to ask that articles are taken separately, but I have mentioned a couple of points during this debate that there is obviously a risk of ending up with the Frankenstein law if particular articles are not accepted that would detract from the cohesiveness of the law, and potentially articles not being present, undermining the articles that are left. So obviously I accept Deputy Gorst's right to ask for a separate vote on this, but I would highly caution against it because of the vitiating effect it may have. Conrad St Lawrence, you have something to say?
So I found the last few days quite difficult to follow, but I've managed that. What I don't seem to have in front of me, sir, is the proposed law as amended. And until I have that, I think I'm going to find it very difficult. We're talking about specific articles, but I really do feel that members should have in front of them what is being proposed by the Minister as amended. And unless and until I have that, sir, I will not participate in voting. Is that able to be supplied, sir, please?
Well, that's a matter, I think, for the Minister to respond to in a moment. Deputy Brenner.
So in which case, point of order, I suppose, which is, would it be appropriate to perhaps propose a brief recess so a consolidated version could be circulated to members for that purpose?
You would need to propose a recess for that purpose. A member's content to, how long would you need realistically to produce this? Minister, one solution might be to continue with other items on the agenda and return to this draft law, because it may take your officers longer than you expect.
Indeed, sir. Could I ask, is it GREF officers I need to liaise with to obtain that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. In which case, I'm happy to propose that we debate other items and come back to this. Thank you, sir.
Yes, members content to proceed in that way? We'll return to this law once we have a copy indicating precisely where we are in terms of articles that have been adopted and amended in second reading. So we now move on to the next item of public business, the draft Children and Young People Place of Detention Jersey Amendment Law, P40, lodged by the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs. The main respondent is the Chair of the Children, Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny Panel. And I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Children and Young People Place of Police Detention Jersey Amendment Law 2000, a law to amend the Police Procedures and Criminal Evidence Jersey Law 2003 in relation to children and young people in police detention following the refusal of bail by a centenaire, and to amend the Children Jersey Law 2002 for connected purposes. The State, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. I am pleased to bring these amendments before the Assembly today. If approved, they will amend the Jersey Police Procedures and Criminal Evidence Act, Evidence Jersey Law, to allow new options for children and young people being kept in police detention when they cannot be granted bail. The amendments will enable a centenaire to transfer children and young people to suitable accommodation provided by the Minister for Children and Families. The law will also amend the Children Jersey law to allow the Minister for Children and Families to accommodate those children or young people. When a child or young person aged under 18 is arrested and charged, prior to appearing in court, the centenaire must decide where the child or young person is placed. Under the law, there is already a presumption of bail, either with or without conditions. And it is the expectation that in most cases, children and young people will return to their home. However, there are those relatively rare occasions when a centenaire may feel they need to refuse a child or young person bail and place them in remand until their first appearance in court. As a former police officer, sir, I know that every centenaire tries to avoid refusing a child or young person bail. On occasion, it is, however, necessary. The grounds for doing so are outlined in the current law and include a belief that the child or young person is likely to commit an offence or that detention is necessary for their own protection. Once bail is refused, the centenaire currently has limited options. They can either place the child or young person in secure accommodation, in other words, Greenfields, or if Greenfields is not available, the only option is for that child or young person to be placed in a police cell, which I'm sure all members will agree is something we wish to avoid. In other jurisdictions, including the UK and Guernsey, there is a further option to allow a child or young person to be placed in a non-secure accommodation like a children's home. That is what these amendments will enable. The effect of this amendment would be to require a centenaire to consider transferring a child or young person to suitable, non-secure accommodation provided by the Minister for Children and Families. They would be required to do so unless they have reasonable grounds for believing that the suitable accommodation would not adequately prevent the child or young person from, among other things, failing to attend court, injuring themselves, or committing a serious offence. If those risk factors existed, then they would go to the Greenfields as they do now. On that final point, the threshold for remanding a child or young person to prevent him or her from committing an offence has been raised. Currently, bail can be denied where the centenaire has reasonable grounds for believing that a child or young person may commit an offence. The amendment will require that the belief is that of a serious offence may be committed. This means that a child or young person cannot be deprived of their liberty on the basis that they may commit a minor offence, which would not in itself warrant detention. As is, in my view, that would be disproportionate. These amendments will help to reduce the likelihood of a child or young person's liberty being taken away before they have even been before the court. In line with our commitment to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which requires that the arrest, detention or imprisonment of a child shall be in conformity with the law and shall be used only as a measure of last resort, and for that shortest appropriate period of time. Sir, I am grateful to the Office of the Children's Commissioner who brought the gap in legislation to the attention of the government, as well as the engagement of the Commissioner and her officers as we have progressed this. I'm conscious in making this speech that I've referred to the Minister for Children and Families on several occasions. The Minister takes significant responsibility to make this law operational, and I know that he will want to make a speech to the Assembly on these amendments. Finally, as well as improving PPCE and children's law, these amendments also make a minor change in Article 7, where the pronouns for the judicial greffier are gender neutralised. This is another minor but small chip at changing language, and in particular the language of our legislation, to be more equitable and where there is no presumption of gender for a specific role. And in this case, of course, the judicial greffier is now indeed a woman. Concluding remarks, sir. These are small amendments which will provide a legislative option for centenaries to use the least restrictive form of remand possible, and by doing so reduce the likelihood of a child or young person being deprived of their liberty by being detained in secure accommodation or at the police station. And I can only reiterate again, sir, a police station is not suitable accommodation for a young person or child. I therefore ask that the Assembly gives their support to bringing these amendments into force. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Are the principles seconded? Thank you. Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. The Children, Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny Panel supports this proposition, which is to provide a further option for suitable accommodation for children or young people charged with an offence but denied bail. Sometimes Greenfields is not suitable. The panel was concerned, though, that there may not be any alternative accommodation available. So could the Home Affairs Minister or perhaps the Children's Minister explain what progress there has been to ensure capacity in the system, for example, small children's homes or specialist foster care?
Thank you, Deputy. Colin Iverson-Peter.
Thank you, sir. I'm grateful to the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs for bringing these amendments to the Assembly, and I hope members will give them their full support. As already outlined by the Minister, these amendments do provide an important new option for centenaries so that children and young people can be accommodated in the least restrictive environment prior to appearing in court. Once in the court system, it is then, of course, up to the court to consider the conditions of bail and not the centenary. As a former centenary, I know it's unusual to refuse a child or young person bail, and that in most circumstances they will return home. To remand a child or young person in secure accommodation or in extreme circumstances, police cells, is something that centenaries want to avoid if at all possible. There are, of course, occasions when this is necessary. For example, when there has been an offence within the home and it is not considered safe for the child or young person to return home that evening, or where the risk of further offending is significant. Where the risk of further offending is significant, or there are significant concerns or risk to a victim, etc., remand to the secure home might be required. However, there will be occasions when a lesser restrictive operation might be considered, where the young person waits to appear before the court. In such circumstances, the new amendments will allow children's services to provide alternative suitable accommodation, which I fully endorse as the Minister for Children and Families. However, delivering the full intent of the new law will take time, as it requires extensive work to develop an alternative accommodation outside of the children's home, or indeed outside of our standard children's homes. That said, the law is an important step that allows for children and young people to be accommodated in a way that avoids secure accommodation where possible and appropriate. And with that in mind, I want to ensure the Assembly that my officers are already working on developing alternative routes to providing alternative suitable accommodation so the new law can be mobilised. This law already exists in the UK, where suitable accommodation is provided in the main by commercial organisations who ensure that non-secure beds are available for 365 days a year. County councils pay a fee or a retainer of around £25,000 a year to be allowed to use these facilities.
Of course, those facilities do not exist in Jersey. As the Minister for Children and Families, my long-term ambition is to develop remand foster carers who would be able to offer accommodation for a young person in their home. But we do not have foster carers who are able to do this at the current time. It will take significant time to develop this option, as currently we have very few foster carers looking after adolescents, and we have not been successful in recruiting carers for adolescents, despite continued recruitment campaigns over the past 2 years. Given the length of time it will take to secure remand foster carers, my office have started to explore alternative routes which can provide such accommodation. The plan is to develop a non-secure children's home option, which would provide an emergency bed for young people and accommodation for the carer who would need to come into, for those children who need to come into care in an emergency. As I've said, it is not suitable to place a young person in a children's home in an emergency without notice, where other young people are already currently living. And that may cause problems with introducing an additional child at short notice and would disrupt the young people already living there. Also, it is quite possible that there would not be beds available in those children's home, and the bed in question needs to be available 365 days a year. Actions to develop the new emergency bed are being developed, but as I've said, will take time. We have identified a suitable property, but any such arrangements will need to be registered with the regulator, the Jersey Care Commission. The new arrangement will also need to be staffed, and the staffing will come from our own existing staff. At this time, as I've said, the remand foster carer option cannot be developed due to a shortage of foster carers of the right type. Thank you, sir. In conclusion, the amendments brought by the Justice and Home Affairs have my full support. They are real and positive legislation step, ensuring we avoid depriving children and young people of their liberty whenever possible. I intend to work with my officers to help ensure that we can operationally provide the accommodation within the first half of 2026. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Connetar. Does anyone else wish to speak on the principles? I call upon the Minister to reply. Minister.
Thank you, sir, and I thank you for the two speakers. As the Minister for Children and Families has explained, this is ongoing work, and his department will have this accommodation ready and available as quickly as possible. So I would therefore like to call for the appel, sir.
Appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. Members are voting on the principles of the draft. I invite the greffier to open the voting. All members have the chance to cast their votes. Ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the principles have been adopted unanimously, 42 votes for. Deputy Curtis, does your panel wish to scrutinise this matter?
Sir.
Thank you. Before we move on to the second reading, I'd like to ask members a question about the residential tenancies law. Would members be assisted by a copy of the Minister's amendment law as amended in second reading, or the original 2011 law as amended? I ask that question because they're different documents, obviously, and both would be time-consuming to produce. I can say that I've been favoured, because I asked for one, with a copy of the original law as amended, and it is quite helpful to see all the changes laid out. Obviously, that only contains the amendments before the debate, so I don't have what you're looking for. Is it, so do members want, you've raised, of course, the Connotab of St Lawrence, the amendment law as amended, or the original law showing all the amendments? What is it that members would appreciate?
So
can I just say that I've also been working off a copy of the original law with the amendments that the Minister proposed, and I have also found it extremely useful. And I think maybe that would be easier because it's already produced to adapt it in the areas that where it's then been amended on top of that by the last day. Potentially would be easier than just seeing the Minister's
So members
amendments.
content with that? I think that's the general view. All right, thank you very much. Returning to the Children and Young People Place of Police Detention draft law, Minister, how do you propose the articles in second reading?
Sir, I would like to take the amendments en bloc. This is a short amendment law, and if passed, will amend both the Police Procedures and Criminal Evidence Jersey Law 2003 and Children Jersey Law 2002.
Thank you, Minister. Are the articles seconded? Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak on the articles in second reading? In that case, all those in favour kindly show. Thank you. Those against? The articles are adopted in second reading. Minister, do you propose the matter in third reading?
Yes, please, sir.
Is the matter seconded in third reading? Does anyone wish to speak on the articles as adopted in second reading in third reading?
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to pay tribute really to all the honorary police officers around the island, and especially the centenaries who have the burden of these sorts of decisions. And we, as the Vice Chair of the scrutiny panel, I fully support this. So I'd just like to put that on file as a thank you to all centenaries who deal with the youth justice around the island. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to speak on the articles as adopted in Deputy Balash?
So it's just a short practical question, really. The law provides at Article 15 that it comes into force 7 days after registration. And I wanted to ask the Minister for Children, really, whether there are, at the moment, places where children can be placed if a centenary decides that it is appropriate for them to be detained somewhere.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak in third reading? I call upon the Minister to reply. Minister.
Sir, in actual fact, the Deputy rightly says that it's the Children and Families Minister who's responsible for the accommodation in relation to this. As the Minister said, they are looking for alternatives of the accommodation because it's a very important part. The law has been forward, and yes, we're aware that it will come into force in 7 days. But it was important to get this legislation lodged. It was ready to go, so we've moved forward with it. And obviously, we would hopefully, as soon as the law is in place in 7 days, we will have be able to provide that accommodation. And that is our expectation, sir. And as I said, we wanted to do this. We wanted to ensure that this law was in place. I would also like to, like the Connotab of Greville, thank centenaries for the work that they do, and particularly in relation to this particular area. And I would also like to thank the scrutiny panel for their support. This is an exceptionally important piece of legislation. I know we've moved through it fairly swiftly today, but I think that just really shows that this is important and it's definitely not contentious, sir.
Is the appel called for?
Yes, please, sir.
Sir, would I be allowed to clarify something that the Minister said?
Will you take a point of clarification?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir. It's simply regarding the availability of the accommodation within 7 days. We actually don't anticipate that that will be the case. And in fact, I've spoken with the Attorney General, and that as a temporary measure until he will issue a directive advising Centenniers that the option isn't available until we are able to confirm the accommodation is available. So the law will be there, but the option won't be available till the accommodation is available. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister. The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats, and I invite the greffier to open the voting. All members the opportunity of casting their votes. Ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the law has been adopted in third reading. 42 votes for, 1 vote contra. The next item, P53, I understand has been deferred by the Minister for the Environment. So the next item of public business is the draft Children and Civil Status Consequential Amendments, Jersey Amendment Number 2 regulations, lodged by the Minister for Children and Families. The main respondent is the Chair of the Children, Education and Home Affairs Screening Panel. I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Children and Civil Status Consequential Amendments, Jersey Amendment Number 2 Regulations 2000. The states make these regulations under Article 82A of the Children Jersey Law 2002 and Article 82 of the Marriage and Civil Status Jersey Law 2001.
The Minister will propose the principles. Minister.
Thank you, sir. The Children and Civil Status Law and supporting package of legislation has been described as one of the most complex legislative drafting projects undertaken in recent years. It has intersected every aspect of legislation determining parents' relationships to their children and their rights and responsibilities. Members will by now be familiar with the policy objectives of this legislation, which aims to provide legal recognition and parental responsibility for individuals undergoing fertility treatment, those forming families through surrogacy arrangements, and same-sex parents. Jersey has historically lagged behind the UK in recognising these family structures. This legislative package represents a significant step forward, achieving in a single package many aspects of legislation that the UK implemented gradually over the past 4 decades, following the introduction of IVF, surrogacy, and legal recognition of same-sex unions. Against this background, I present a final set of consequential regulations to help support some small but nevertheless important technical aspects of the Children and Civil Status Law. These additional amendments were identified during the policy development for the abolition of legitimacy law. They introduce no new policies and merely support the original policy intentions of the Children and Civil Status Law. The amendments fall into three key areas. Firstly, the regulations add new routes to registration for parents who die before their child's conception when they have consented to fertility treatments, such as the use of frozen embryos. This change ensures that a deceased parent can officially be recorded, supporting the child's sense of identity as they grow into adulthood. The parent will be recorded for registration purposes only, with no right of succession. This safeguard prevents retrospective claims on the deceased parent's estate, which may have been settled long before the child was conceived. Secondly, we are strengthening a number of provisions to ensure that parents who have obtained overseas orders equivalent to Jersey parental orders are treated on more equal terms. This will primarily benefit parents with UK parental orders, which our legislation is designed to reflect. In line with our commitment to family-friendly policies, these changes will enable eligible parents to access parental benefits and leave. We are also amending the definition of via parental order across several pieces of legislation, ensuring consistency with the interpretation set out in the Primary Children and Civil Status Law. Furthermore, we will shortly publish comprehensive surrogacy guidance, setting out clear protections for intended parents, surrogates and children in Jersey. Grounded in best practice for surrogacy in the UK and developed in conjunction with operational departments, this guidance will play a key role in supporting the implementation of Jersey parental orders. Thirdly, with the proposed abolition of legitimacy and the introduction of new, more inclusive routes to parenthood, we are witnessing a shift in how the law recognises parents and modern families. As a direct consequence, the concept of domicile of dependents has required codifying in statutory legislation. Domicile of dependents is the principle by which a child derives their legal home from their parents. At present, this is governed by customary law, and whether a child whose parents are in a mixed-sex marriage is legitimate. As this legislative package abolishes the concept of legitimacy and recognises new routes to parenthood, part of this customary framework are no longer applicable and thus creates uncertainty. Considering the new legal framework for parents, it has been necessary to clarify the existing position of a child gaining domicile of dependence from their parents in statutory legislation. Only one small change has been made so that children born in mixed-sex couples who are in a civil partnership will gain their father's domicile in the same way that children of mixed-sex married couples do. This aligns marriage and civil partnership. These consequential regulations are exactly that, direct consequential amendments, and they do not seek to rewrite the concept of domicile, but rather to provide certainty for all children once the new legal changes take place. This is not a debate on the broader concept of domicile. This is outside of the scope of the consequential regulations. We would simply harmonise the traditional framework with new legal changes. Transforming domicile dependence would require extensive consultation and engagement with legal experts, families and stakeholders. Domicile is an important legal concept with implications for succession and taxation. Any changes would require very careful consideration. What we are doing today is necessary and more focused, more immediate. We are ensuring that no child is left in legal limbo because of the way they came into the world. I would also like to take this opportunity to provide a brief update on the commencement of the Children and Civil Service Status Law. Over the summer, officers have been working closely with operational departments to plan for a smooth implementation of the new legislation later this autumn. New court rules and application forms have been drafted and updated processes have been developed to support readiness across the system. Staff will receive the necessary training and guidance in coming weeks. Once I've signed the ministerial order confirming the commencement date, we'll launch a coordination communications campaign targeting families, community groups and the wider public. This campaign will ensure that families are clearly informed about the changes and understand how they may be effective and know what steps they may need to take. This law has been a long time in development and many years in coming, it represents a significant milestone in modernising Jersey's legal framework for families, recognising the diversity of modern family life and enshrining fundamental rights across the community. And I hope all members will find they are able to support it. Sir, I propose the principles.
Thank you, Minister. Are the principles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. The Children Education and Home Affairs panel welcomes the continuation of putting into practice the Children and Civil Status Law. This has been a huge piece of work which means a lot to many families, and we would like to acknowledge this, the amount of work that's gone into this, and thank officers for their extensive briefings.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Doublé.
Thank you, sir, and it's really good to have the next stage of this legislation before us today. I just had a few brief points. I wanted to thank the chair of the scrutiny panel as well, because the comments that they produced were quite detailed, and I was able to have a look at those and have a brief discussion with members of the panel and the chair herself about a point that I had identified. Now, I don't feel strongly enough about this point to delay the legislation or to vote against it, because I think more as much as the Minister himself understand that there are some necessary compromises to be made in order to bring this law forward as quickly as possible. But I wanted to, for the record, just to note that articles, the new articles 7AA and 7AB, and again, the chair of the scrutiny panel mentioned these. I know that her panel raised this issue as well, and I think came to the same conclusion as I, that it's not ideal that we are, it's not actually creating equality by changing the default domicile from the mother to the father in mixed sex civil partnerships. It is in fact entrenching an existing inequality. But I do understand why the Minister has had to do this on this occasion. But I wanted to flag that because culturally, of course, the reason why we granted mixed sex civil partnerships to those couples is because they may not want to enter into the institution of marriage and may instead prefer a civil partnership. And I do not necessarily see I don't support the rationale behind making civil partnerships identical to marriages for that reason, because I think many couples may wish them to be slightly different, and this may be one of the things that they would have liked to be slightly different from a marriage. But I will leave that one there, sir, and I won't be voting against those articles. The Minister mentioned communications, and I understand that he has a communications plan, but I would urge him not to wait and to communicate, because the communication does need to be happening already. And there are families who will have understood that we are debating some consequential amendments today, and they will be confused and perhaps thinking that the law is coming into force. And I have raised this point before, and I know the Minister is receptive to this. If he could please communicate more frequently and sooner, so that people aren't just waiting to hear. And any information and any small clarifications is better than radio silence. Could he also clarify the likely date? So I know he has mentioned later this autumn, but if he could refine that just a little, even if it later changes, understandably, due to the work needed on the law, just some clarity and more precision around even which month he is aiming for would be helpful to the families. I think that's everything I had to say about that, sir, but yeah, thank you to the Minister, and I'm pleased to see that this is ongoing. Actually, I did have one more. The comments from the panel, when I read them, there was a detail there that they said when they were briefed by the Minister, that the Minister had said the rules of court were still in in process. Now, it was my understanding that those rules of court had already been finalised. Could the Minister just update the Assembly as to whether that particular step has been finalised? And if it hasn't, how much more time is needed on that step in order to be ready for the law to be in force? And also, if the Minister could just identify what he believes to be the biggest risk at the moment in terms of any further work that might need to be done that might push the date slightly. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Ferry.
Thank you, sir. I'll deliver my speech now because it does address some of the points that Deputy Dublais just raised. So I rise in support of this amendment, which introduces a small number of consequential amendments necessary to support the implementation of the Children in Civil Status Law. These amendments do not include any new policy changes. Rather, they ensure the policies contained in the primary legislation are enacted throughout the Jersey Statute Book. The regulations before us today are technical and necessary adjustments to support the smooth implementation of the law. As members will be aware, the Children in Civil Status Law, supported by the abolition of legitimacy law, represents a significant and progressive step in modernising our family law framework, improving parental rights. Firstly, these regulations add some roots to the marriage and civil status law to registered deceased parents who have died before their children are conceived via fertility treatment from frozen embryos. Secondly, these consequential regulations improve the recognition of orders from other jurisdictions with an effect corresponding to the Jersey Parental Order. These will primarily be parental orders granted under the UK Human Fertilisation and Embryology Act 2008, which our legislation works alongside. I would like to take this opportunity to explain why it's important for the regulations to include provisions that formally set out a child's domicile of dependence. Under Jersey's customary law, a child's domicile has traditionally been tied to their legitimacy and, by extension, to their marital status of their parents. This has determined whether the child inherits the domicile of the father or the mother. While the abolition of legitimacy, part of this customary framework will be removed, creating potential uncertainty for families. These amendments are therefore necessary and purely consequential. They do not aim to reform the domicile framework itself, but rather to place the existing customary rules for determining a child's domicile of dependence on a statutory basis. In essence, we are codifying the current customary position with only one minor adjustment, aligning the treatment of children of mixed-sex married couples and civil partners. This change decouples the link between a child's domicile and a now abolished concept of legitimacy, ensuring that domicile is determined based on the legal union of their parents rather than outdated legal statuses. Let me be clear, these amendments do not introduce a new model for determining domicile of dependence. Domicile is a significant legal concept, particularly in relation to succession and taxation, and any broader reform would need to be carefully and comprehensively considered with further policy development and consultation. Our approach has been to provide clarity and legal certainty without making substantive changes. Any case for reviewing Jersey's domicile law in the future is a separate matter and lies outside of the scope of these regulations. What we are doing today is ensuring that once legitimacy is abolished and new routes to parenthood are added, our laws remain coherent, consistent and operable. Without these amendments, we would risk creating legal uncertainty. I urge members to support these regulations, which form the final component of the Children in Civil Status legislative package. This marks a major step forward in the modernisation of Jersey's family law, aligning it with the profound changes in medical technology and family structures that have taken place over the last 40 years. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on the principles? Minister.
Thank you, sir. I thank all members for their contributions. And I would thank my Assistant Minister for covering the areas of domicile and giving clarity. I would also thank Deputy Dublé for her understanding about why there has had to be a compromise there, and that we cannot look at the whole area and revisit the whole area of domicile at this time. I was asked what I consider the greatest risk to be at current, and I think the greatest risk today is probably the fact that there's been a cabinet reshuffle in the UK. We are fairly certain that we are aiming for a date of the last week in November for the law to be in place, but we do believe that the cabinet reshuffle might cause some delay with the Privy Council. We will have to wait and see if that's the case. Sir, I would therefore ask for the appel.
The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to this.
So could I ask a point of clarification?
Yes.
Could the Minister answer and I thank the Minister for all the answers he's just given the Assembly, but could he clarify about the rules of court? I'm sorry if I missed it. I'm not sure if he answered my question about whether they were completed or not.
So yes, you're right. My understanding is that the rules of court are in draft form at the moment. Whether they're I would have to check with the office if there's still the potential for any changes there. I'm doubtful that's the case, but I'm quite happy to send an update to the Deputy.
Thank you. I invite the greffier to open the voting on the principles. All members the opportunity of casting their votes. Ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that the principles were adopted unanimously, 43 votes for. Deputy Curtis, does your panel wish to scrutinise this matter?
Sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister, how do you propose the regulations?
On block, sir.
Thank you. Are the regulations seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does anyone wish to speak on the regulations in second reading? Dr. Balash.
So I rise only to point out to the Minister a small typographical mistake in Regulation 6 on page 10, 75AB, domiciled of child conceived in circumstance B. In paragraph 1, little b, it reads conceived naturally and born to parents who are not married to or a civil partnership. And I think the word in is missing.
As members know, there's a standing order allowing minor corrections in third reading, and that will be corrected at that stage. Does any other member speak on the regulations? I call upon the Minister to reply. Minister.
Thank you, sir. As we are aware, this marks the final piece of legislation on children and
The microphone.
Sorry, sir. This marks the final piece of legislation under the Children and Civil Status Project, a complex and long-awaited reform. With it, Jersey's laws will reflect the realities of modern families, ensuring equal recognition for families formed through fertility treatment, surrogacy, and affirming the parental rights of same-sex couples. I want to pay tribute to the families who have come tirelessly and waited many, many years for this moment, and also for scrutiny for their valuable work. Your voices have helped to shape the change. I thank members for their support. This is a landmark step forward to children's UNCRC rights, and I reaffirm my full commitment commencing this legislation by ministerial order in the coming months. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister. The appel has been called for by Deputy Doublé. I invite members to return to their seats and the greffier to open the voting. All members have opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the regulations have been adopted unanimously. 44 votes for. Minister, do you wish to propose a matter in third reading?
I do, sir.
And do you wish to propose that I accept understanding Order 75 that there needs to be an amendment in the way described by Deputy Balash to 75AB, adding the word in before a civil partnership?
I accept that, sir, yes. And I thank the Deputy for bringing that to our attention.
Yes. Is the matter seconded in third reading?
Yes, sir.
Does anyone wish to speak on the articles as adopted? Conatable Brevet.
Yes, sir, and again I stand to thank the officers at our final briefing from the law officers. The iteration that they were on at that time was iteration 127. And I almost felt, sir, at that time that the gentleman concerned needed a hug, and I really offered him that. It was a huge body of work, and I congratulate all the officers and the law officers for getting this done. It's a major step forward, and I thank the Minister and for all his briefings. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conatable. Does any other member wish to speak in third reading? I call upon the Minister to reply. Minister.
Thank you, sir. I think there's little more that I can say other than to thank everybody involved, the officers, scrutiny, and I would also like to thank Liberate for their important contribution. I also thank all members for their support, and sir, as I say, it's been a long time coming, but we are now here. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The appel has been called for. I invite members to return to their seats, and I invite the greffier to open the voting. All members have had the chance to cast their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the regulation has been adopted unanimously. 44 votes for. The next item is the Draft Elections Senators Jersey Amendment Law, lodged by the Privileges and Procedures Committee. I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Elections Senators Jersey Amendment Law 2000, a law to amend the Constitution of the States and to provide for the election of senators and for connected purposes. The States, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
I call upon the Chair of PPC to propose the principles. Deputy Ayer.
Thank you, sir. PPC is bringing forward this legislation as a result of this Assembly's decision in March 2025 to adopt P2, reinstatement of senators. The committee, its officers, and especially the legislative drafter worked at speed to bring this legislation forward so that it can be debated today. and be in force in time for the 2026 elections. This was not as straightforward as some members may have believed. The various changes made to the elections law in 2021 meant that it was not simply a case of inserting the word senator into the existing law anywhere that deputies and connétables were mentioned. The drafting process was very complex, as can be seen by the length of the drafted law. It is incumbent upon me as chair of PPC to bring forward this law change. It is well known that my personal opinions on the return what my personal opinions on the return of senators are, so I will attempt to remain as neutral as possible when making comments which may be misinterpreted as being brought by myself rather than by my committee. Since we have a long debate ahead of us, I will leave my opening remarks there, and therefore, sir, I make the proposition. Thank you.
Are the principles seconded? Does anyone wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Miller.
Sir, thank you. Sir, I would also like to thank PPC and the GREF and the Law Drafting Office for all the work in bringing forward this legislation today. I was clearly, as he will know, one of the ones who thought it would all been very straightforward, and I do appreciate the work that has been involved in bringing it together, and I'm grateful personally, and I'm sure everyone else who supported is also grateful for their efforts. Sir, after the debate in March, I received a huge amount of feedback from members of the public. People emailed me, I had phone calls, I met people who were universally, I would say, pleased that the island-wide mandate was returning. The day after the debate, I spoke with a journalist who said to me that she didn't often have members of the public speaking to her about things that were happening generally, but on that morning alone, 3 people had come up and said, isn't it great that we've got senators and island-wide mandate coming back? And she said she felt there was a real lift in town, a little morale boost in town from people, and not everybody will agree, but members of the public were very happy with that decision. And I think it is important the public think that they will be voting for senators come 7th of June next year. And I think we would be very, very ill-advised as an assembly to do anything that disappoints them. I remember in the debate in March, someone saying, oh, this is all about old Jersey. This is not about old Jersey. Many of the people who participated in the discussions that we had last year were older, but people of all age groups have said to me that they are pleased this is happening. I'm also not going to say a great deal on the basis of I do think the public think this is going to happen, and they will be very, very disappointed in this assembly if we do anything. We heard several members spoke yesterday about wrecking amendments, and I do hope that those members who criticised Deputy Balash will bear that in mind before bringing any wrecking speeches of their own. The public expect this to happen. And as an assembly, I think we are duty-bound to deliver to them what they think we have agreed in March, and I can only encourage everybody to support the proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak? Connétable of St John.
Thank you, sir. It looks as though I'm going to disappoint one of my district deputies. Sir, it can be a very lonely place sat on these benches here. Since I've been elected, I have continually supported my constituents by supporting the result of the referendum in 2013. So I do so because we actually asked the public what they thought, and 81% voted for change, and that change did not include senators. Yes, the turnout was low, probably because most people aren't interested in what we're called. They're far more interested in what we do. Of course, some members have never accepted the result of that ballot and have continued to vote against its outcome at every opportunity. How many people didn't vote in 2014 following this Assembly's refusal to adopt the results of the referendum? My anecdotal evidence, sir, and I was involved in many campaigns, would suggest far more than 3%. And that wasn't just people who voted for option B. People who voted for A and C accepted the result. But they were very angry, sir, angry about the refusal of this Assembly to adopt it. People said that not enough people voted. I remind members that in the 2016 senatorial by-election, only 12,200 people voted. 4,000 more people voted in the referendum, sir. Imagine if we had put as much effort into online voting, postal voting, changing polling stations. These efforts surely would have resulted in higher turnouts next year. So opinion surveys suggest that the reasons for the low turnout are mainly genuine negative attitude towards the political system in Jersey. The main reasons given for people not voting in the 2022 election were 30% of respondents said it wouldn't have made a difference. And I wonder how many of those voted in the referendum. 28% said they didn't trust the political system. I'll return to this theme shortly. Almost a quarter, 24%, said they weren't interested in the election. Some 22% said they didn't know enough about the candidates, and that is down to us and all those who stood. 3% said they didn't know where or how to vote. And that same percentage, sir, yes, just 3%, who said they didn't vote due to the loss of the island-wide role of senator. I said I would come back to trust earlier. Sir, earlier in this sitting, we discussed the need for trust and we were reminded of the position as being leaders. Let's consider that in the context of what we're being asked. So when asked, the public voted in the following way. In St Helier, 85.7% of people voted for change. In St Clement, 84.4% of people voted for change. In St Saviour, 83.5% of people voted for change. In St Ballard, 82.7% of people voted for change. So I won't go through the 12 parishes, but I will say that I will continue to support the 76% of people in St John who voted for change and would respectfully ask my fellow connotabs to do the same. The irony of the extension we voted on this morning wasn't lost on me and probably others. We voted to stay until 8 p.m. with no notice the previous day. We currently have the most diverse assembly the House has ever seen, and we're being asked to go backwards with this proposal, and that will undoubtedly, in my view, make the House less diverse. Members may have noticed how full the Chamber's been this week. Have members been asked not to travel to off-island meetings? I'm pleased to say, sir, that it's not always a lonely place. I was delighted when my fellow Connotab colleagues supported the move to Sunday polling. Will this be successful? Well, if we accept these proposals, we may never know. When introducing change, you should measure the success or otherwise of that change. If we vote to add senators and more people participate, then we'll be told that's because of senators. If there is no increase, undoubtedly we'll be told that's due to the poll taking place on Sundays. At every election, we see the significant efforts that the more senior members of our community make to come out and vote. In my view, this proposal is designed to appease this part of the community. Clearly, like every part of our community, these people make up a very important part of the island. But what about the others, sir? What are we doing to encourage younger voters? Making things simpler? No. What are we doing to encourage those who don't have a long history in Jersey? Making things simpler? No. The larger districts have worked in different ways. Some districts hold regular surgeries together. Some districts don't appear to work together. We should give the current system at least one more term to see how things settle down and not make a backward step at the first opportunity. For my point, I find the larger district a good thing. If I can't help a constituent, I can ask one of the 4 very good people who are deputies in the district to help. I do this dependent on their experience and interests, and this works very well in my experience. In the old system, I had 1 parish deputy, and if neither of us could help, what next? So I remind people of the election observers' comments from the 22 election. I won't go through the 12, sir. I'll start with number 1, electoral reform. Substantive amendments to election law should be adopted well in advance of the next election and never less than a year before. I'm reliably told by a colleague who doesn't sit far from me that there are just 269 days before the next election, or 9 months, and yet today we're being asked to adopt significant changes. Members may want to go to page 33, paragraph 60 in section 3, election expenses. So if the proposal accepted and it's anticipated the increased number of people go onto the register, we could see, as reported by one body locally, the following. For a senator, expenses of up to £13,776, and for a deputy, £3,557. Do the public really want to vote for someone who spends £10,000 more than a deputy? People may have accepted that someone would invest more in the campaign when senators had a 6-year term compared to other members' 3-year terms. But the only difference now, sir, is name. Do we think the public want their representatives to be frugal and manage their own money well and the public's money even better? Sir, I will continue to support the results of the 2013 referendum until such time that the public change their mind. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conor. Does anyone else wish to speak on the principle? Deputy Tadia, then Deputy Ward. Tadia.
So despite probably what I'm going to say is that I'm fairly agnostic on whether the senators should come back or not. I think there hasn't been that wider societal debate about what are the different ways in which a society can elect its members, what the voting system should be, and then what the potential outcomes of that could be. And I think in the absence of that, we've always had very internalised debates, which are often quite fractious because they've been self-serving debates, essentially. Every assembly wants to do what's best for that particular assembly rather than looking at the bigger piece of democratic models and how they might compare to elsewhere and what might actually best serve the public. I don't think this has been any different. And I think that actually, rather than simply trying to, I think it appeals to the old regime, sir, the old way of doing things. And I'll, to a certain extent, unpack that. But I do have to take exception at this idea that the revisionist history that Deputy Miller paints, that the day after the vote for senators, that there was this lift in St Helier, that the productivity in the workplaces all went up, that people were coming up in with massive grins on their faces, the electricians, the plumbers, those who worked in the banks in Jersey, the teachers all turned up to school a little bit earlier with a bounce in their step. And when the headmaster asked those teachers, or the head teacher asked those teachers, what's going on? You look particularly sprightly today. It says, haven't you heard the latest news? The States Assembly have just voted to bring back senators, the island-wide mandate. What's that? Oh, don't you know, sit yourselves down, let's have a cup of tea, and I'll explain to you the constitutional history of the States Assembly since 1948. Oh, what, you mean they didn't exist until 1948? No, they didn't. We brought them in as a kind of makeshift to keep people happy when we got rid of the Jurats. Oh, right. Well, I better get back to my next lesson because I'm actually teaching history today and I didn't know any of that, but thanks for the lesson. Or was it simply that somebody accidentally put some MDMA in the water and that's why people were looking so happy? I'll let members decide. I think actually none of that happened. People went on about their business. And of course there will be some people who had lobbied Deputy Miller who were entirely happy that senators were coming back. And what that tells us is that the people who wanted senators to come back were really happy. And they called Deputy Miller, and the people who are perhaps the political insiders who look at our electoral system and perhaps talk to other members were saying, I think that was a jolly silly decision, and they're still saying to us now, some of those, I hope you don't vote to bring back senators, because we've already got a complex enough electoral system with 2 types of member, which we're just about getting our heads around. Please don't add another tier of confusion to that. So there are different ways, and there are, you know, we live in a pluralist society where people have different views, and of course different people talk to different members who often reinforce our own views. We sometimes get people vehemently disagreeing with us, but we tend to get people contacting us who already know what we might think on something and want to also share that solidarity. So I think we can discount the whole idea that the island is clambering for the return of the island-wide mandate. But we also get people telling us mutually contradictory things, don't we? We say to people saying, oh, I'm glad you brought back the island-wide mandate. I think you should all be elected on an island-wide mandate. And I don't know what the constables say to that. Do they say, yep, absolutely, I agree with you. Actually, no, I don't agree with that. And what do we as deputies say? And the other thing is that, of course, you could bring back the island-wide mandate in so many different ways. We could all be elected, or whoever could be elected on an all-island-wide mandate like they have done in Guernsey, which they've done for a second time. To be fair to the Guernseys, if we can call them that, to our cousins over the water, I didn't think they'd last that long with this current electoral system. I thought they'd have one term of it and then they'd think it's completely ridiculous and get rid of it. But it has lasted for a second term and it seems to be doing the job for them. So, you know, I think there are pros and cons in any electoral system. But at least they have a universal system where everybody's equal, that everybody's vote is equal. They have one constituency where you can vote for the whole island. We're going to introduce an extra level of curiosity, if you like, into our voting system. And of course, why 9? We're choosing to bring back 9 senators, which we've never had before. Why not the full 12? Why not the 6 that we had previously? And of course, why do it in this way? Why do it by removing a seat from every district? Of course, the districts have been finely balanced to make sure that they're representative of the population, and by removing 1 seat from every district, it doesn't work. The maths don't work. And so whilst members say, you know, we shouldn't get hung up on mathematical exactitudes, of course, if you took 3 deputies away from every district, we would know that couldn't be fair, could it? Because Grouville and St Martin would have no one representing them. Town would have maybe 1, 1 and 2, and other parts of the island would just have 1 deputy. And I think the over-representation and under-representation of certain areas would be fairly obvious. But that over-representation and under-representation is made even worse by the way that we're reintroducing senators. So the point is, there's nothing wrong with having senators back. The island-wide mandate, there's nothing wrong with it. And of course, people attach to it emotionally, and they also attach to it emotionally because it's easy to understand. And it's familiar for certainly the older generation who are used to that senatorial system. But certainly the generation who were voting for the first time in 1948 wouldn't have found that a familiar system. Just as the generation who voted for the first time in 2022 will have no truck, or if that's the right expression, they'll have no recollection of what it was like to vote in an island-wide election, or to vote indeed for their local parish deputies. They wouldn't have voted ever for a deputy of St John, of St Martin, of Grouville, or St John's, because that was the trade-off, wasn't it? When we brought in the new system, it was abolishing part of the parish system which had existed for much longer than senators, that stretches back with that long tradition of constables. And so what we've done in that one fell swoop is that we've tried, I think, to get this blend of keeping parish representation with the constables staying automatically in the assembly, and to move to a kind of quasi super constituencies. To say it in the Jersey context is perhaps, slightly ironic, but it is a super constituency for Jersey. But now we're going to get this very strange system where we've got senators sitting alongside deputies who in many cases don't represent their parishes. They represent 3 districts, 3 parishes that make 1 district. I have the luck, if you like, of representing a parish which happens to sit inside a district, and it makes things a bit cleaner. St Helier is divided into 3. St Saviour remains its own parish, but that's not the case for St John, Trinity, and St Lawrence. It's not the case for St Mary, for St Peter, and what's the other one? St Mary. St Mary, and I could go on, but I think we get the gist. I'm sorry if I've misspoken there. But it shows how complicated it is, even for somebody who's an insider, to get these things muddled up, let alone a member of the public who's actually saying to us, not, I'm grateful that you're bringing the senators. What, you're changing it again? You only just changed it at the last election, and you only just had a referendum in 2013, which we also voted on, which we told you that we didn't want the system. We wanted change, but we wanted a workable and fairer system. But you seem to be changing it again for your own vested interests. And for what? Let's have some honesty here, I think, for the first time. Is it so that certain members of this assembly can simply go around and say, we want the title of senator, because we like the island of senator, the title of senator. We like the idea that we've got a bigger mandate than you've got. Is it about the size of your mandate? Is the size of your mandate important in being a states member, or is it actually how you use your mandate that is important? I think it's the latter, isn't it? I think it's about what you do in here. It may not be about us, of course, this will be about future members in this assembly, but it's about what you do in here. It's not about how you get here, because we all get here through different routes. But all of us are legitimately elected. And I think that idea that just because you've got 10,000, 15,000 votes, it doesn't even translate into an automatic right that you will get any particular job, as we know already. So the idea is that we're going to be spending, the media, I think, will be spending a lot of its attention by necessity on covering the election for 9 seats which make up less than 20% of this assembly, for people wanting to get a title of senator. There may be, 15, 20 people running for that position, depending on how we do it. And there'll be very little scrutiny on what's going on for the other 40 seats, perhaps for the 12 constable seats, some of which will be contested one way or the other. They'll all be facing an election for at least for none of the above, and the other 40 seats, and the other 28 seats that are going to be contested for deputy, all for what purpose? To make our system even more complicated, even more opaque. So I would say if we don't have to pass this, I think there has been a period of reflection. I dare say that actually some emotions were running high in the last debate because of the way that amendments are put in, I think for the right reasons, but they perhaps some amendments got certain people's backs up, that there was an element of fractiousness even then. And I think what I would say is to those who are perhaps considering wavering on this, is that it's absolutely right after a period of reflection to question whether this is the best thing to do for the public of the island, or whether that this is just going to perpetuate more and more debates in the future where arguments come back about, well, I think now we should have 12 senators. I think now we should have an island-wide mandate for everybody. I think now we should have an island-wide mandate, but which includes keeping the constables in the assembly, because there will be all of those permutations. And I think if we can't get through one electoral cycle followed by another where there's been an agreement that our system works, and actually that we've made some progress which actually marries tradition, because it has recognised the fact that that referendum took place. It's recognised the fact that there was also a referendum separately on the role of constables in the assembly. And at that time, and that's probably the same today, the public overwhelmingly said we want our constables to also be members of this assembly. But we recognise that there needs to be some rejigging of the boundaries. There needs to be some fairness in that. And so what we have currently, I think, it can be said, does marry the best of both worlds. I think in the Jersey context, it's a very Jersey-specific solution, and it was come to after years of deliberation. The likes of Deputy Balash, who may have lots of different political opinions to myself, Deputy Renouf, who at the time was on the Electoral Commission, but also people like Deputy Alves, Deputy Russell Labby, and those other members who have served on various constitutional bodies going back through time in Jersey, who were from right across the political spectrum, Jersey traditionalists and conservatives, who all came up with a model and said, look, we need to do something. And the model we settled on was a hybrid system which said, let's have slightly larger districts which are equally balanced so that everybody has to have a reasonable number of votes, contested elections, importantly, for deputies, but still keeping the traditional element of the country parishes. That's what we had, and we talked about throwing the baby out with the bathwater yesterday. I think that's actually what we're in risk of doing here. And again, I say what for? Simply so that some members who are elected to this assembly will have the title of senator, whilst others will simply have to have a title, a lesser title presumably, of deputy or constable. But ultimately we know who is going to be doing the real work in this assembly. It's those members, whatever their title is, who are committed to being here for the right reasons. I think it's all of us, and who may come forward in the future, is to represent our constituents and to do it in the best way possible. So I don't think we should come into this saying it's a rubber stamping exercise. I think we have to use our intellect as well as our hearts in this debate, and I would urge members to reconsider if they voted last time, perhaps with some misgivings. I think those misgivings are probably correct, and actually I would ask members to agree that the progress that we've made since the first time really in 1948 with these new election models that we've been through are actually a pretty good system. Don't try and get a perfect system when we have something which works, I think, very well already.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. I don't really want to speak now after Deputy Tadier, but I'd like to, but I suppose I have to, because he makes a good point with humour, which I don't think I can do on this. I suppose I have to be practical when it comes to this, and I just want to ask, and to everybody who's voting today, to answer some questions in their own mind about the change we're about to make. And that is, what is the role of senator in this assembly that's different from everybody else? Because this notion that there's an island-wide understanding or mandate that perhaps we don't have as a deputy. Well, we are voting at the moment in the middle of residential tenancy law, that affects everybody on the island. We have votes every single assembly on things that affect everybody on the island, and we have to have an island-wide mandate. I've tried a whole iteration of constituency drop-ins in loads of different places to try and encourage people to come along. I'm quite complimented that actually the constituents in my the constituents in my district, I see and I know, and they can call me and they message me and they email me, and we solve their problems quite often, and I have chats with them and they don't come along. So I have other constituents coming to my drop-in from all over the island, particularly in a role as minister now, because they want to talk to me about ministerial things, usually mobile phones, and we've had lots of discussions in that way. I cannot understand what would be different if I had a senatorial role or a deputy role in this assembly. And what we will inevitably enter, and I think it was denied in the debate originally about senators, was that if you want to be a minister, if you want to take on a role, you have to be a senator. Otherwise, you haven't got an island-wide mandate. And that, to me, goes against the grain, because I think we should have people taking on ministerial roles for all sorts of reasons, one of them being experience. I would not really have wanted to take on a different ministerial role because I wouldn't have had the experience that I have for the role I'm in. Now, you can make your own judgments about me, and I'm sure you absolutely do, and that's absolutely fair enough. But I can stand here confidently and say that I've spent the vast majority of my career in the education system. And when I have conversations as a minister within a department, I do so from a position of knowledge, which is great. But that is, I am a deputy in the centre of St Helier. Now, I know that within the debate itself, our right to be here was questioned by some because of voter turnout. But I've now got to go back to constituency and say, actually, you're going to remove a deputy from this constituency in your representation. And when you look at the variance from what is equality of representation across the constituencies, you've got one of the largest differences in variance. And if we support the Constable of St Helier, and it's nice for me to be able to stand here and support the Constable of St Helier, we don't always, it's nice to be able to bury the hatchet every so often, that's probably a bad analogy, but it's nice to be able to do that. Then that will make it slightly better for South and North, but actually the largest variance will be in St Helier Central. And then I have to go and convince constituents it's really worth you voting. Come out and vote because you're valued by the Assembly. And these are the unintended consequences of this change. And I want people who are going to vote and say, what are those senators saying? Are you saying that those 7 or 9 or whatever number it is now, I'm losing track, senators, they will the only people being ministers? Because if so, and you are in this Assembly now, and you don't stand as a senator, you're giving up that role in the future assembly. So you've got to take the risk to be a minister, to be a senator, to be a minister. And just simply voting for more faces does not increase democracy. It's about the quality of representation that we get. Who is going to stand? How are we going to emphasise the importance of being a deputy if you've got a layer above? And it is not clear as to what these roles are for. Now, we have got the most diverse assembly. That is important. It's a subtle thing. It's not easy to define, but assemblies across the world and parliaments that have representation from across their society are better reflective of their society. And you get that by very local representation. And we have significant local representation. We will lose that, particularly in St Helier North and St Helier South. It will change. And I think we have to be very, very careful about taking this forward without knowing the genuine implications of what that means. And if the issue is to be Chief Minister, you have to be a senator. So it's about one post. So taking away all of that representation about one post, then there's no validity, it seems, for any Chief Ministers that have been through this term of the Assembly. And I don't think that's fair, because we've been through processes to have Chief Ministers in this Assembly. When we first started, and yes, I know it was unfortunate, and I know that soured relationships with however, but I think we've all learnt something about this Assembly as we've gone through. So I struggle with us voting as an Assembly for something that is undefined, not clear as to why we're doing it, that will give another layer in this Assembly that we will inevitably be, and I'll make a prediction, that we will come to ministerial elections, and if somebody is a senator, they will stand up and say, I should have this because I have a whole island mandate. And it will be that simple. So we are, ipso facto, voting for the Council of Ministers with senators. And that will take away a huge amount of choice from this Assembly. And we will not have a meritocracy, which is what we need for good governance. We will have a bureaucracy, just simply because of the way that those elections went. And we will have, I mean, I've been to senatorial hustings. I went to one. I didn't go to another one because there was, I went to support a colleague. Of course I did. You're a fantastic colleague, okay? I simply cannot disappoint Deputy Gall, so I let him believe. It's important we all believe, we have faith and belief. I know he has a strong faith. I'd encourage him, sir, believe it. There we go. It's not the only misplaced belief, but there we go. But so I tried to stand there and think, okay, if I didn't know anything about, I didn't have a predetermined idea, what could I judge from this? And my answer was really nothing. Each member had 15, 20 seconds to try and say the same thing, and everybody's saying, well, so I agree with them, or I say this. And if you went first, you got your point, and if you went at the end, it all been said. And so that is not the way to do this. The way to have democracy on this island is that in our districts, you knock on every single door and you have those conversations. And you talk about the difficult things. When we come to in my constituency, yes, there were controversy over what's happening with the park. We knocked on every single door and we talked to people and we explained what was going on and we had those conversations. And the nicest conversations, and this might seem odd, are the ones where somebody said to me at the end, do you know, I just simply don't agree with you, but thanks, we had a great conversation. And I'd say, that's fine, that's the way democracy works, it's really nice. I'm going to go and knock on someone else's door now. Okay, thanks, have a good day. That's the way to disagree politely and kindly. And in the world we're living in, look at the news today, we've got to be very careful that we carry on doing that, because we can set an example. Final thing I would say, sir, and this is a personal note, as a chair of CPA, I've been involved in election observations around the world. My name was on the report for an international election observation. I'm very proud, because it was a lovely piece of work done, where one of the comments was about not making changes so close to an election. And in my assembly, we're making changes less than a year before the election, which on any recommendation of good practice, it says, do not do that. We need to run the system through we've got again one more time. We need to look at the quality of that assembly. And then if we really want to make that change afterwards, we need to have valid reasons, absolute clarity on the roles that we are creating for this assembly. Otherwise, we're not managing. We're not having an assembly that will work into the future, and we will continue to lose our credibility. And I'll make final point. So I was very disappointed earlier when a member of the assembly said about a proper job. So I commit absolutely to my job. I work all the hours under the sun, and I'm exhausted at the end of the day. I'm proud to do this job, just as I've been proud to do the other jobs I've done in my career, and that does not help raise our profile. So this is not going to change that. It's with the actions that we take, and I think we have to have clarity in what we're doing, and I will continue to not support this. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else want to speak on the principles of the draft law? Deputy Messer.
Thank you, sir. I got to my light just in time. This will be the fourth time the Assembly has debated the principle of reintroducing senators in some shape or form in this term of office, and members have fluctuated in their positions on that each time that it's happened. Of course, some have had a consistent opposition and some consistent support, but the reason we're here this time is because of some members changing their minds along the way. And that, sir, is obviously a sign that this is not a done deal. And I want to recommend to members that that deal is cast aside and we go back to what the presumption had been for most of this term of office, which is that we would have the next election on the same basis that we had last time. And I think there's multiple really good reasons for that, and I was pleased to follow the previous three speakers who made each their own very good points in that regard. Sir, speaking as one of the old guard in this Assembly, I've run for election 5 times. I have an 80% success rate. I've done so on a parish basis and on an island-wide basis, and I've served in the Assembly on a parish basis and island-wide basis. And I have no hesitation in making the 2 claims that the last election campaign I was involved in was by far the best election that I've witnessed in Jersey, in that we had really competitive elections across all of the districts. The constables had more challengers from other candidates than I can remember in previous terms, and even those who didn't still had none of the above, which was competitive in some instances as well. And in the deputies' districts, voters really did have a choice. I would say that there were good quality candidates spread across the whole of those districts, and voters had a genuine choice as to who they wanted to represent them. I found as running for a district, I had a really good balance between being able to go out, knocking on doors, meeting voters, making the case to them for why I thought I was the candidate they should consider voting for, finding lots of support, finding the occasional door slammed in my face from people who didn't want to vote for me, and that's part of the democratic process and really important. And secondly, sir, it then produced an Assembly which is the most diverse we've ever had, which does not have what we had in previous terms of office, which is the them and us that I did feel when I sat on the senatorial benches looking around the rest, because in deciding who gets what role, the mandates come into it rather than the ability of the candidate and their support across the Assembly. Not having that dynamic in this Assembly has, I think, been much better, and even though there are still 2 categories of members, because there's still a parish connection either way, I don't feel the them and us between the different categories of member that I did previously. And that, sir, is why I honestly feel that this Assembly, the work it's done and how it's conducted itself, has been the best of those assemblies that I've been involved in my 11 and a half years in politics. I'm worried that if this proposition goes through, that we will have a worse election next time round. And it will be worse for multiple reasons. There is the disillusionment that I think the Constable of St John referred to. And I know Deputy Miller will say that lots of people who spoke to her were supportive. I absolutely don't doubt that, but I do think that there's an obvious connection between us being associated with a cause and those who like the cause going to you to say, jolly good, well done, thank you. But if you look more broadly, we have lots of signs that there is a great sense of fatigue among the public of us talking about ourselves over and over again on this subject, constantly changing the system, going forwards, then going backwards, and all that comes with it. It is fair to say that on social media, there was overwhelming opposition to this, maybe about 90% or something like that, I think, in what I observed. We have just that engagement that I've had when I've gone out into the various different circles in our society, be that at some charity event that I'm invited to, be it a Chamber of Commerce event that I'm invited to, be it private meetings with business representative groups, etc. And I was finding from lots of very sensible and capable people who are doing really good work in our community that there wasn't any sense of great enthusiasm for this, because many of them recognised that tinkering with our voting system like this is not going to lead to better results. You know, for those different sectors of our society, you know, charities don't care whether we're elected 3 different ways versus 2 versus 1, island-wide district. What they care about is that we've got a government that understands them and has at least a degree of social justice as part of their platform. Business community doesn't care if they're talking to a senator or a deputy or a constable. What they care about is that they're talking to a states member that understands why it's important to support business and respond to their needs and do so in a decent way for the whole island. That is a view I frequently have put to me, including from people who are otherwise wholesale opposed to my politics. But in terms of their support for democracy, we're aligned on that. And so is, of course, as the Constable of St John mentioned, that referendum from 2013, which by the proponents of this proposition constantly seek to gloss over because it's inconvenient, which is that when we actually ask the public, come out and mark your cross on a ballot paper, or number on a ballot paper, I think it was for that one, come out and tell us what you want of these options. The overwhelming majority, 81% I think it was, came out for change, and that was across the parishes, not just in St Helier, across all of the parishes. There was an overwhelming desire for that. And you can see why. And even those of us who weren't on the winning side reconciled ourselves to it for the greater good. And I maintain that position. So moving to next year, let's say that we adopt the proposition that's on the table. It will technically be the most complicated election that we've ever held, because technically we will be having 5 categories of states member. You'll have the senators elected island-wide, you'll have the constables elected parish, you'll have some deputies elected on a parish basis, some deputies elected on a sub-parish basis, and some deputies elected on a supra-parish basis. And that's not what we had from 2018, where the deputies districts were only either parish or sub-parish based, not supra-parish based. So that makes the system automatically more complicated. It means that when you're engaging with a voter, the first portion of time you've got to dedicate to it is telling them what the paper they're going to get handed at the polling station means, not about the issues that they actually care about. You're going to spend all this time explaining, well, we have 3 categories of states member. They all do the same job, ultimately, in the Assembly, but they're elected in different ways. Don't ask why, because there isn't actually a rational reason for that, apart from that the British government thought that was a nice compromise back in 1947, which I don't think that reason will go down very well. You spend all this time, eyes will glaze over, because what people want to talk about is the healthcare system's strained at the moment. What are you going to do to solve that? I'm worried about my kids' future in the island because I don't think they're going to be able to afford housing. What are you going to do about it? Those are the issues that motivate people to care about what's happening. And if they feel confident, turn up, take that ballot paper and mark it to cast their verdict on what they actually want. Having to spend all this time explaining to them all these different categories, especially if you've never engaged with the system before, is going to be nothing but off-putting. A simpler system is the best way of delivering that. And so I challenge any member in support of this proposition to explain why this is the perfect system for Jersey. Because I bet you even many of the supporters of the proposition don't believe that. Because when we go out and we talk to constituents about what voting system they might want to have, there is a clear distinction between senators and island-wide voting, because they're not necessarily the same thing. So if you asked me, I'd quite happily have all 49 of us elected on an island-wide basis. I'd be perfectly happy for that system. I don't care what we're called, doesn't matter. But that absolute equal system, all of us with the maximum mandate possible, I'd be totally in favour of that. I'll vote for that if that comes along. No problem with that. But to say this system of everybody in the island having a say on an equal basis in that island-wide constituency where voters get the maximum choice, the maximum input into who's going to hold the most senior positions in government. All of those are really compelling arguments for island-wide voting. You then say all of those good, compelling arguments, but only for 9 out of 49 of them, not the other 40. So my big concern for the election next year is that whilst there might be a vibrant election for those 9 senators, what about the other 40 of the members in this assembly? I think we'll end up with an under-contested election in a way we didn't have last time, where the choice across the whole island was a really good choice, where you'll have some members who may, last time round, if you wanted to run for election, the question was, do you want to run, yes or no? Next time round, the question is going to be, do you want to run, yes or no, and as what? Especially if you're a new candidate, how do you decide why would you run for senator rather than deputy? If you're an incumbent member having to make that choice, why would you do so? You're going to have to make all sorts of calculations rather than just the simple question, do I think I can make a difference to my community? Yes, I'll put my name forward for election. You're going to have to calculate, is it senator, is it deputy? Do I swap district? All the rest of it, none of which is helpful and none of which will lead to the whole election across all of the districts, people broadly having a good choice that's well contested where the result matters. That's going to be much less likely. You're going to have this focus on those elections for 9 seats. The other 40 seats might not get what would otherwise be viable candidates because they've decided to go for senator. Some of those people will be misjudging it. Might come 10th by 20 votes, whereas in their local district, they would have been popular for that and could have had a really positive contribution to make on a local basis. That dynamic will be gone, and that will mean, sir, an uneven distribution of representation across the Assembly. And that I worry about that because I want the public at the next election to go to the polls to cast a verdict on what kind of government they want. And the more paperwork you have to hand them to do that, the more explaining about a weird different system that doesn't really have any justification for it is detracting from that process, where the only thing that can provide a good process there is equal votes on an equal basis with a simple system. And the system we had at the last election was infinitely superior to that we had in previous elections. And so there is, of course, the problem that we are breaking international good practice on this. That is simply a fact. The Venice Commission is absolutely clear on this, that you don't make these kind of changes at short notice, which is what we are doing. They also say that your distribution of members should be proportionate to population. We are going backwards in that regard, and doing so consciously, because under the current system, deputies were distributed to account for the malapportionment that occurs as a result of the constables' parishes being unequal in size of population. The deputies were there to balance that out. Really good system, mathematically did a good job there, but it's not as simple as just taking one from each district, because you're doing that for 1 out of 37 versus 1 out of 29. So it actually does apportion that badly and makes that malapportionment even worse. And that's not good for all of the reasons that I think Deputy Ward talked about. And so I will disagree with Deputy Miller, who talked about wrecking amendments, where on the table this time, that most definitely isn't the case. I don't agree with all the amendments that have come forward, but some of them do, I think, attempt to salvage the situation. The Constable of St Helier does a good job in his amendment to address some of the malapportionment that happens as a result of taking 9 deputies out of the equation. And that is indisputable. He's done the maths. You can see it in the chart. There's no question that he's accurate on that. In terms of an under-contested election, yes, it would be helpful to go back to the system that we had for 63 years of the senatorial existence, where they were elected a month before. That does make that cleaner. You have your focus on that, you have your result, and then you have your focus on your local election, and have that result. That will not be under contested, and it will have all of the same benefits that the 2022 election had, because the focus would be on there and you'd have well-contested districts then. And that was the logic underpinning the three categories of member for most of its existence. So I would say to members that we've debated this multiple times, we've fluctuated in our decisions on this. There is no reason why we need to maintain the decision that was made in March. And I genuinely worry that we will have a worse kind of election campaign next time round, undermining the public's ability to have a decent and fair say as to who runs the government of the island. So I urge members to vote against.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to say something about the efficiency of which we debate. Because when we introduce a law, we debate something at the principal stage. And from what I understand, that the principal stage is when you actually say whether you should have a debate of the law. Now, sometimes we have propositions that say, let's have a law. And I reckon, and maybe I'm being incredibly naive, I'm actually asking our Gref officer advice on this, even as I speak. Sometimes we have a proposition saying, let's bring in that law. Sometimes we don't. Which really makes me wonder, why are we debating the principles when we've already said that there should be a law? We have been told the point of debating the principles is whether we even like the idea of the law. I could go on about the fact that nothing's perfect. I might even agree with Deputy Mazik about maybe everybody should be senators. I don't know, but what we can say is as politicians, rarely do we talk about perfection. As politicians, sometimes we compromise. As politicians, we have to actually think about, well, is this what our electorate want, and all these things, and all that's been discussed. So on that basis, because I feel like I've been there before, déjà vu, I will be supporting the principles. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy.
So could I raise a point of order at this point for you to answer, sir? Just that the principles are obviously the principles of this law, not the general principles of having senators, whether that's a good idea. Any law is about what's in front of us and the detail of that, rather than a general idea of would it be nice to have senators back. Of course, that latter can come into the debate, but it's not. That's not what the principles are, sir.
Are you asking for me to give members guidance on what the principles are?
Yeah, I think just in a high-level terms, in a general sense, sir.
Well, I'm not going to read the ruling out I gave last time because it was quite a long one. But there are no definition in standing orders of what constitutes the principles of a draft law. The principles can perhaps be seen as the high-level purpose of the draft law in question or the rationale underpinning the legislation. It's ultimately a matter of personal and political judgment for members as to whether or not they vote for or against the principles of a draft law or draft regulation. And to vote for or against the principles doesn't prevent a member from changing their mind about adoption of the articles or their view in third reading in due course. There is no definition of what constitutes the principles. Does any member speak?
So, no, I did. I suppose what I'm asking is that there's a difference between an in-principle debate that a backbencher brings, which isn't bringing legislation, versus what a minister or a chair of a body brings to enact that previous.
Oh, I follow. Well,
that's what I was getting
yes,
at.
I see what you mean. Well, propositions generally deal with principles and invite ministers frequently to go in, do various things. This is different. These are principles of a law. It's not an in-principle debate in that sense.
So can I ask a slightly different question, if I may? Are we going to complete all of this debate now through all of everything on senators? I'm not making myself clear. So are we going to complete the entire debate on senators, or will we come back to the residential tenancy when it's ready? And I think the reason I ask that is because there's a flow to debates. And I just want to know. Thank you, sir.
Well, that's... Yes. It's a matter ultimately for members, but now we've started this debate, members may feel it's appropriate to finish it, but it's a matter for members. If a time comes when it's appropriate to go back to that law, then we could do so. But I had imagined we would complete this law, but it's a matter for members if they wish to go back to the other law and complete it. Does anyone wish to speak on the principles before we adjourn? If no member wants to speak, Deputy Luce.
I'll be brief, sir, and I will stick to the principles as I see them. I listened to Deputy Mezek, and he's quite right. The fairest system here would be to have everybody elected on an island-wide mandate. But those of us, well, not myself, but those who are statisticians will tell you the difficulties that you get with trying to elect 49 people. So I won't go into that, but certainly senators and an island-wide mandate is a fairer way to elect people across the island. I just want to say, sir, I was one of the politicians that voted to remove senators in a previous assembly, and I was left in no doubt that when I campaigned at the last election, the error of my ways. Everybody I spoke to in St Martin complained bitterly about the loss of the votes that they had expected and had not realised until the very last minute weren't getting. And I undertook at that time that I would support senators if it came back, and I will continue to do that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak? No one else wishes to speak, then I will close the debate. I close the debate and invite Deputy Ayer to reply.
Thank you, sir. What turned out to be quite a short debate. I will quickly review some of the comments made from members. Deputy Miller said that it was a morale boost to bring back senators, and that the public would be very, very disappointed if that was not the case. The Constable Sir Johns mentioned the 2013 referendum and how disregarding it may have led to a reduction in voter turnout. He also mentioned the Lifestyle Survey report of 2025, which said that 3% of those who said they didn't vote because there was no senators, there was only 3% who supported that argument. And that changes should never be more than a year before an election, which was mentioned by a few people. Deputy Tadier said that he was agnostic on the proposal. I'm sure we all understand that Deputy Tadier is agnostic on a number of things.
So with it, I'm fervently agnostic, I think.
That was as I thought, sir. But he also mentioned that we have never had 9 senators before. Deputy Ward said, again, it was too close to the election and that we would lose our credibility. Deputy Mezek says we now have really competitive elections as we are, and 90% of people oppose this move on social media, which is obviously something I'll leave for Deputy Mezek to clarify, because I have no way of confirming whether that is true or not. So we also should be talking about the issues and not the electoral system. Deputy Scott mentioned that sometimes we should compromise, and Deputy Luce says everybody elected on an island-wide mandate, everybody elected on an island-wide mandate is the fairer way. So obviously not many people have contributed to the argument, because I presume that most members have made up their mind. So for that reason, sir, I will leave my comments there and maintain the principles, and I'll call for the appel.
Members are reminded that 25 votes are required under Standing Order 89A. I invite members to return to their seats, and I invite the greffier to open voting. All members have the chance of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the principles have been adopted. 29 votes pour, 17 votes contre. Yes.
Those voting pour, the connotabs of St Helier, St Lawrence, St Bralard, Trinity, St Peter, St Martin, St Clement, Grouville, St Juan, St Mary and St Saviour. Deputies Labby, Luce, Morel, Lehegara, Gardner, Gorst, Farnham, War, Miles and Scott. Rose Binet, Miller, Howell, Tom Binet, Ferry, Barbara Ward, Stevenson and Andrews. Those voting contre, the connotab of St John and deputies Southern, Tadier, Ayer, Rob Ward, Mezek, Balash, Corray, Renouf, Catherine Curtis, Feltham, Jearn, Kovac and online, Kovac and Wilson, and online deputies Cole, Dublay and Alves.
Councillor Adjourn. Oh, actually.
Members content to adjourn? Adjourn until 2:15.